I used to believe the scariest monster in the world was my department manager at 8:59 on a Monday morning. Then I died under a stack of unpaid invoices. That sounds dramatic, but it was honestly the most normal thing that had happened to me all year. My name is Ryan. I was a modern office worker, which meant I spent my life turning coffee into spreadsheets and pretending that a printer jam was not enough reason to become a villain. At night, I was alone in the office again. The lights had already switched to power-saving mode, so every other desk looked like a grave marker for someone else's free time. My boss had left me with a budget report, 3 correction forms, and a note that said, "Please revise by morning," as if morning was a rumor and not a deadline. I remember staring at one number on the report. Operating expense, $1 million. $1 million, not my dollars, obviously. I had $17 in my bank account and a coupon for instant noodles that had expired with more dignity than my career. I was so tired that I whispered, "I wish I could just erase 10." Then the fluorescent light above me flickered. The ceiling opened like someone had dragged a selection box around reality and hit delete. Next thing I knew, I was falling through a blue tunnel full of glowing symbols, ancient voices, and what looked like tax documents written by angels. I tried to scream, but a piece of paper flew into my mouth. Even in another dimension, paperwork found me first. When I landed, it was face first in a meadow. Not a battlefield, not a dragon's nest, not even a sacred temple with a goddess apologizing for an administrative error. Just grass. A bird looked at me, decided I had no combat potential, and flew away. I pushed myself up and checked my pockets. No phone signal, no wallet, no legendary sword, no magic ring, no stat window, no beautiful goddess whispering that I had been chosen to defeat the Demon King. All I had was a tiny white eraser. It was the cheap kind from my office supply drawer, the type that leaves more smudges than solutions. At first, I laughed. Then I realized I was wearing my office clothes, my shoes were muddy, and the town in the distance had walls, towers, and absolutely no convenience stores. That was when I stopped laughing. The town gate had a wooden board hanging beside it. Entry fee, 10 copper. I had no copper, I had no anything. The guard stared at me like I was a suspiciously unemployed scarecrow. Behind him, merchants paid and entered, a farmer paid and entered, a kid carrying a basket paid and entered. Everyone in this world had money except me, which proved I had successfully brought my most reliable skill across dimensions. Being broke. I tried to explain my situation. The guard listened for 3 seconds, then pointed at the sign. Entry fee, he said. That was my first lesson in fantasy society. Magic existed, monsters existed, kingdoms existed, but customer service did not. I slept outside the gate that night. I used my blazer as a blanket and my anxiety as a pillow. Next morning, a merchant caravan arrived, and while the guard was busy checking crates, I crawled under a wagon like a raccoon with student debt. That was how I entered my new life. Not as a hero, as cargo. The town was called Larkridge, and it looked like a place designed by someone who had read too many storybooks and not enough labor laws. There were cobblestone streets, flower boxes, smiling bakers, little magic lamps, and class discrimination arranged neatly by neighborhood. The rich lived uphill. The poor lived where the rainwater went. I wandered all morning looking for work. A blacksmith needed apprentices with arm strength. A mage guild needed apprentices with mana. A guard post needed recruits who could swing a spear without apologizing to it. I had none of those things. My greatest talent was detecting when a meeting could have been an email. By noon, hunger made me brave. I walked into a tiny lodging shop with a sign that said, "Rooms available." The shopkeeper was polishing a counter and wearing the expression of a man who could smell poverty. Behind him was a board. Rent 100 gold per month. I did not know the exchange rate yet, but I knew enough to understand that 100 gold was not a beginner number. It was a number that belonged in a castle, a lawsuit, or a medical bill. I sighed and leaned on the counter. My eraser slipped out of my sleeve. I fumbled for it. The shopkeeper did not notice. My thumb brushed the board. The eraser scraped across the first zero. Rent 10 gold per month. I froze. The dust fell like snow. The shopkeeper blinked. His eyes drifted to the board. For 1 second, his expression went blank, as if someone had quietly replaced a gear in his head. Then he nodded. Ah yes, 10 gold, a fair price. My stomach stopped growling just to listen. I looked at the board again. The missing zero did not look scratched. It looked like it had never existed. The shopkeeper pulled out a ledger and turned it toward me. The ledger also said 10 gold. That was when my entire personality changed direction. I had been in this world for less than a day, and I had already discovered the most terrifying magic possible. Not fire, not lightning, Accounting. Of course, I still had a problem. 10 gold was cheaper than 100 gold, but I had 0 gold, and erasing 0 from 0 is just emotional damage. So I backed out of the shop and walked the market like a starving ghost. Everywhere I looked, words controlled reality. Apple 2 copper. Bread 5 copper. Fine for loitering 1 silver. Guild registration 5 silver. Begging prohibited by town order. I stared at that last one for a long time. Then I looked at my eraser. The sign said, begging prohibited by town order. I carefully erased prohibited. Begging by town order. The change hit the street like a bell no one heard. Passing official stopped, checked the sign, and frowned. Then he shouted that the town apparently had an official begging program today and ordered nearby citizens to contribute to public compliance. Within 10 minutes, confused townspeople were dropping coins into my hands because refusing to support a town order might involve forms. I stood there with my palms full of copper, staring at a world where the law had accidentally become my street performance. That was the first time someone called me suspicious. It would not be the last. By sunset, I had enough for bread, soup, and one night at the cheap stable behind an inn. I could have tried to erase the price lower, but I had already learned something important. The eraser was powerful, but attention was dangerous. It worked best when people already believed in the text. Price tag, a law, a contract, a permit, anything official, anything society had agreed to obey without thinking. If I erased a random word in a personal letter, nothing happened except the sentence got worse. But if I erased one word from a posted rule, the world behaved like the new rule had always been there. I slept in the stable that night, hugging the eraser like it was a holy relic made by a stationery company. The next morning, I went to the Adventurer Guild. Not because I wanted adventure, I wanted employment. In fantasy worlds, guilds always had notice boards, quests, and some kind of receptionist who calmly judged your worth. I was ready for all three. The guild hall was loud, warm, and full of people carrying weapons bigger than my future. A party at one table laughed when I walked in. One of them pointed at my necktie. I could see the joke forming before he said it. Lost noble. The room laughed. I smiled politely, because modern offices train you to survive public humiliation without committing a felony. At the counter, a young woman with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers looked at me over a stack of forms. Her nameplate said Clara. Clara was the first person in this world who did not immediately treat me like a rat in shoes. She treated me like a rat in shoes who might still fill out a form correctly. That was respect. Class, she asked. Office worker. She paused. Is that a mage subclass? Worse. She handed me an application. It had boxes for sword skill, magic affinity, divine blessing, monster experience, and emergency contact. I filled in what I could. Sword skill, none. Magic affinity, none. Divine blessing, questionable. Monster experience, manager. Clara read it, lowered the paper, and sighed with the gentle sadness of someone watching a duck apply to become a horse. She stamped it. Application denied. The stamp landed so hard I felt it in my spine. The adventurers laughed again. Someone said even the guild paper had more courage than me. I took the application, bowed, and stepped aside. My ears burned, my stomach tightened. I had spent years being evaluated by people who thought worth came from numbers on a form. Now I had been reborn into a world where the form had a sword section. Finally, I found a quiet corner near the notice board. The application read, application denied. I did not need to write anything. I only needed less. I erased denied. Now it read application. Nothing dramatic happened, no thunder, no golden aura. But Clara suddenly looked confused. She checked the stack of papers on her counter, then looked around. Why is this still pending? She muttered. She picked up my form, frowned at the blank space where the denial had been, and stamped it again. Approved. The room went quiet when she called my name. I walked back to the counter like I had not just committed clerical necromancy. Clara handed me a copper badge. You are provisionally registered as a civil errand adventurer. No combat quests, no monster quests, no rescue quests, no dungeon quests, no heroic quests. So what can I do? She pointed at a smaller board near the broom closet. Lost cat. Deliver invoice. Count barrels. Repair fence. Copy tax archive. The adventurers laughed harder than before. But I looked at those quests and felt something dangerous bloom inside me. They thought combat was power. They had not seen a tax archive. My first official quest was to deliver an overdue invoice to a bakery. The quest paid 3 copper, which was almost nothing, but the invoice itself demanded 40 silver from the baker for late flour delivery. The baker was an old woman with flour on her sleeves and fear in her eyes. She begged me to ask the merchant guild for more time. She said the flour had arrived spoiled. She said the debt was unfair. She said if she paid, she would lose the bakery. I had heard that tone before. It was the same tone people used at work when a company mistake became their personal emergency. I asked to see the invoice. It said payable 40 silver. Then underneath penalty if unpaid 20 silver. And underneath that failure to pay allows seizure of ovens. I stared at the sentence. Allows seizure of ovens. It was official, signed, stamped, recognized. I erased ovens. Failure to pay allows seizure of. Magic hesitated. The paper trembled, trying to complete itself and failing like a manager without a slide deck. A merchant clerk arrived 10 minutes later to collect. He read the invoice, frowned, and said the seizure clause was incomplete. Since the object to be seized was not specified, the debt could not be enforced until corrected. The baker cried. The merchant clerk cursed. I received 3 copper and a loaf of bread. That loaf tasted better than promotion. By the end of the week, I learned the shape of my new life. I accepted the quests everyone else rejected. I delivered notices. I copied forms. I carried permits. I walked into offices where armed warriors would rather fight wolves than wait in line. And every time I touched a document, I looked for the weakest word. A debt of 30 silver became 3 silver. A fine due immediately became a fine due. A shop ban that said no entry for commoners became entry for commoners. A tax notice that said additional levy applied became levy applied, which made the official argue with the word additional for an hour and give up. I never helped people for free at first. I was not a saint. I was hungry, tired, and petty, but I charged less than the corrupt clerks and I did not steal from poor people. That made me look heroic by accident. The rumors started after I fixed a fishmonger's license. His permit had been rejected because the form said, business may not operate within market district. I erased not. Business may operate within market district. The official stamped it while complaining about how sloppy the previous review had been. By noon, people were whispering about the quiet man with no sword who could make paperwork behave. By evening, adventurers stopped laughing when I entered the guild. They still smirked, but now it was the careful smirk of people who knew I might have access to their unpaid bar tabs. Clara noticed first. She watched me from behind the counter, eyes narrowing every time a rejected form mysteriously returned approved. One night after the guild closed, she blocked the door with a stack of ledgers and said, "You are doing something." I considered lying. Then I remembered she controlled my quest payments. "Yes," I said. "Is it illegal?" "That depends on whether the law has enough words left." She stared at me. Then for the first time, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent years being trapped under bureaucracy and had just been handed a shovel. Clara took me to the back archive, where shelves sagged under the weight of every rule the guild had ever used to make poor adventurers poorer. "Can you fix these?" she asked. I looked at thousands of forms, fees, restrictions, penalties, and exemptions. My hands shook. Not from fear, from joy. Next morning, the guildmaster discovered that novice adventurers no longer had to pay an equipment inspection fee before accepting non-combat work, because the rule now read equipment inspection before accepting. Non-combat work. It was no longer a fee, it was just an inspection, and no one wanted to do inspections without a fee, so the whole thing collapsed. At lunch, the rule requiring poor adventurers to buy guild-approved boots became requiring adventurers to buy boots, which even the guildmaster admitted was difficult to enforce, because most people already owned feet. By dusk, the punishment for late quest reports changed from 2 silver fine to silver fine, and the accounting office argued that silver fine sounded like a decorative item. The guildmaster summoned me. He was a huge man with a beard like a tax shelter and a desk large enough to qualify as terrain. He asked if I had been tampering with guild documents. I said no. Technically, I had been simplifying them. He slammed his fist on the desk. A contract slid toward me. Confession of fraud. Sign below. I looked at the line. There was no way I was signing that. But the word fraud was official text, stamped and prepared. I rubbed the eraser over the first letter. Confession of odd. The guildmaster blinked. Clara, standing behind him, coughed into her sleeve. What is odd? He demanded. Possibly a bird, I said. He tore the paper in half, which taught me another rule. If text was destroyed normally, reality did not update. The eraser needed to remove it cleanly. It was not about damage, it was about deletion. He threw me out of the office anyway. But he did not revoke my badge. Because the revocation form said, badge revoked due to misconduct. And by the time he found it, misconduct had become conduct. Badge revoked due to conduct. Even he could not punish me for having conduct, not without creating a dangerous precedent. That was the first time I made an institution retreat by being annoying. A week later, I met June. June owned 3 market stalls, 4 storage sheds, and the kind of smile that made you check your pocket after shaking her hand. She sold fabric, spices, paper, ink, lamp oil, and information, mostly information. She approached me after I helped a cobbler erase a predatory late fee from a loan. I hear you make documents lighter, June said. I reduce waste. Words, among other toxins. She laughed and placed a folded contract on the table. It was a merchant partnership agreement. Her supplier had added a clause in tiny letters saying that if delivery was delayed for any reason, June surrendered half her profits for the season. She had signed it while traveling, in bad weather, with 3 witnesses and a headache. The supplier had delayed his own shipment on purpose. Classic. Every world had a department for this kind of evil. I read the clause carefully. If supplier delivery is delayed for any reason, merchant June forfeits 50% seasonal profit. I could erase 50, leaving percent, useless. I could erase delayed, but then the sentence became nonsense. Nonsense sometimes weakened a document, but it did not always break it. Then I saw it. For any reason. I erased any. If supplier delivery is delayed for reason, merchant June forfeits 50% seasonal profit. Next morning, the supplier tried to enforce the contract. The merchant court asked him to provide the reason. He said weather. June produced shipping records showing clear roads. He said bandits. No bandit report existed. He said warehouse confusion. His own warehouse ledger contradicted him. Without any reason, the clause demanded a real reason. He had none. He paid June damages. June paid me 5 gold. That was the first time I held a gold coin. It was heavy, warm, and deeply persuasive. I moved out of the stable that night. Not into the 10 gold room, that still cost too much monthly. Instead, June told me about an abandoned property on the edge of the old noble quarter. It had once belonged to a minor estate that collapsed under debts, curses, roof leaks, and at least one suspicious goat incident. The town had tried to sell it for years. Nobody wanted it because the deed was a nightmare. I went to see it with Clara and June. The mansion sat behind iron gates wrapped in ivy. Its windows were cracked. Its fountain was dry. One tower leaned slightly, like it was listening to gossip. The front door had teeth marks in it, and none of us asked why. To me, it was beautiful. Because I had once lived in a studio apartment where the bathtub and kitchen sink had an emotional relationship. A sign on the gate read, property condemned, sale price 1,000 gold, structure uninhabitable. Buyer assumes all debts, liens, curses, unpaid garden fees, and possible haunting. Clara read it and said, this is not a mansion. This is a legal disease. June said it has potential. I said nothing. I was staring at 1,000 gold. 10 came off easily. Sale price 100 gold. Still too high. Another 0. Sale price 10 gold. June made a small choking sound. Then I erased from uninhabitable. Structure habitable. Clara grabbed my sleeve. Ryan, that roof has a tree growing through it. Officially habitable tree. The next part was harder. Buyer assumes all debts, liens, curses, unpaid garden fees, and possible haunting. I could not erase all of it. The line was recognized, but if I removed too much, the document might become invalid, and invalid documents were useless to me. So I erased debts. Buyer assumes all liens, curses, unpaid garden fees, and possible haunting. Then liens. Buyer assumes all curses, unpaid garden fees, and possible haunting. Clara whispered, maybe leave the haunting. It might be cheaper than taxes. I erased unpaid. Buyer assumes all curses, garden fees, and possible haunting. Garden fees sounded manageable. Curses were vague. Possible haunting was basically a roommate with boundary issues. At the town property office, the clerk checked the deed, looked bored, and said 10 gold was a fair price for a habitable structure with garden fees. I paid with June's fee and every coin I had. The clerk stamped the deed. My hand trembled when he gave it to me. Owner Ryan's. For the first time since arriving in this world, I had an address. Then the mansion door fell off when I touched it. Home ownership was exactly like my old world. The next arc of my life began with a bucket, a broom, and a curse that made the upstairs hallway whisper unpaid taxes at night. Clara helped after work because she said watching me survive was better than tavern comedy. June helped by selling me broken furniture at a discount and calling it antique. I moved into the least dangerous room, which was a former pantry with only one leak and no visible bite marks. The mansion needed repairs, and repairs needed permits. Larkridge had rules for everything. To fix the roof, I needed a roof repair permit. To apply for a roof repair permit, I needed proof the roof existed. To prove the roof existed, I needed an inspection. To schedule an inspection, I needed the roof to be safe enough for an inspector. I stood in the permit office listening to this loop and felt a calm so deep it became violent. This was my terrain. The official handed me a rejection slip. Request denied due to unsafe roof. I erased unsafe. Request denied due to roof. The official stared at it, annoyed. Denied due to roof, that makes no sense. Everyone applying for roof repair has a roof. He crossed it out, stamped approval, and told me not to waste government time. I thanked him for his service. By the end of the month, my mansion had a patched roof, 2 functioning rooms, and a sign by the gate reading: "No trespassing, owner not responsible for injuries, hauntings, tax confusion, or emotional damage." I had not written that sign. It was already there from a previous owner. I only erased the word severe from severe emotional damage. I was becoming attached to subtraction. But comfort attracts predators. The first noble arrived in a carriage with gold trim and contempt polished into every wheel. Grant stepped out like the street had personally insulted him. He was young, handsome, rich, and dressed in white gloves, which told me he had never touched a broom without accusing it of treason. His family owned half the old quarter, and apparently my mansion sat in the middle of a redevelopment plan. Grant wanted it. He entered without knocking, looked around my repaired foyer, and smiled. "You must be the clerk who watches the property." I said I was the owner. He laughed, but softly, like laughter was a coin he did not want to spend on me. Then he produced a document. It was a noble recovery claim, a legal monster that said any property formerly connected to a noble estate could be reclaimed if the buyer was a commoner lacking proper privilege recognition. At the bottom it said, "Commoner owner not eligible for noble property protections." Grant tapped the line. "You purchased a legal trap. Sign the surrender and I may let you keep the pantry." Clara, who had come by with repair invoices, went pale. June, who had arrived to sell me curtains that smelled like history, looked interested in the way merchants look before someone loses money. I looked at the documents. Commoner owner not eligible for noble property protections. There it was. The word that had bullied humanity since the invention of hierarchy. Not. I erased it. Commoner owner eligible for noble property protections. Grant's smile remained for 1 second too long, as if his face had not received the memo. Then his eyes shifted to the paper. The room changed. Not physically, socially. That was scarier. Grant straightened, Clara inhaled. June bit her lip to avoid laughing. Legal assistant beside Grant adjusted his spectacles and whispered that the recovery claim no longer applied because I was, according to the recognized wording, eligible for noble property protections. Grant snatched the paper, read it 3 times, and said the assistant was fired. The assistant said firing required a separate notice. Grant left without the mansion. That night someone threw a brick through my window. Attached to it was a note. "Leave the noble quarter." I stared at the note, then at the brick. I could not erase violence from reality. The eraser was not a shield. It would not stop a knife, a fireball, or a brick with commitment issues. For the first time, I understood the limit of cleverness. Paper ruled the world until someone decided not to use paper. So I needed protection. Not soldiers. Soldiers were expensive. I needed rules. The next morning, I went to the town guard office and requested neighborhood security. They laughed until I showed them the Noble Quarter Municipal Charter. By ancient law, any owner eligible for noble property protections could demand routine patrols if estate disturbances threatened tax stability. The clause originally said tax stability of noble households. I erased noble. Tax stability of households. The captain stared at the charter with the trapped expression of a man being attacked by grammar. By sunset, guards were patrolling my gate. When Grant's hired thugs came that night, they found 6 board guards, 3 lanterns, and June selling hot skewers from a cart because she smelled foot traffic. The thugs left. June made 2 silver. I realized then that I was not climbing alone anymore. Clara understood the system from inside. June understood money from every angle. And I understood one sacred truth. Every unjust system depends on people accepting too many words. My mansion became a weird little office for problems nobody else could solve. Farmer arrived with a contract that said his harvest could be purchased for market price minus merchant discretion. I erased merchant. Now the discretion belonged to nobody, and the clause collapsed. Washerwoman arrived with a rent notice that doubled because her landlord claimed premium street access. I erased premium. Street access was not a luxury if the street touched the door. Junior mage arrived crying because the academy exam marked her mana control as insufficient. I erased in sufficient. She passed and later sent me a thank you cake that exploded gently when sliced. Clara began bringing cases from the guild. June brought clients who could pay. I charged on a sliding scale, mostly because Clara glared when I did not. Soon people called me the eraser clerk. Grant called me a plague. The guildmaster called me an audit risk. I called myself self-employed, which felt illegal in every universe. Then the bank noticed me. Banks are the same everywhere. The buildings change, the money changes, the uniforms change, but the smell is always polished wood and quiet threat. Larkridge Royal Bank sent me a notice saying my mansion came with an inherited maintenance bond from the previous estate. The amount was 300 gold, payable within 10 days. I had seen no such debt on the deed after my edits. So I brought the notice to June. She read it, whistled, and said, "Fake old debt, very fashionable." Clara checked the city archives and found the original bond. It was real technically, but it had been discharged years ago. The bank had copied an older version and hoped I was too poor to fight. The notice said, "Failure to pay 300 gold will result in foreclosure." The easy move was erasing zeros. 300 became 3. But if I paid even 3 gold, I admitted the debt existed. Old office trauma screamed inside me. Never acknowledge a bad invoice. So I studied every word. Failure to pay 300 gold will result in foreclosure. I erased failure. To pay 300 gold will result in foreclosure. Now the sentence said paying would trigger foreclosure. June laughed so hard she had to sit down. Clara covered her face. I took the notice to the bank, placed it on the manager's desk, and said I was very concerned that payment would legally cause foreclosure. The manager read it. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Behind him, 3 clerks began whispering. Because the notice was official, it had the bank seal, the bank had sent it, and according to its wording, the dangerous action was payment. I requested written confirmation that I should not pay. The manager refused. I asked if he was instructing me to pay and trigger foreclosure. He refused that too. I asked for a cancellation certificate. He said he could not cancel a debt that might exist. I asked for proof it existed. He reached for the old bond. The bond said maintenance bond unpaid. I erased maintenance bond paid. The manager's soul briefly left the building. By afternoon, the bank issued a correction, stating there was no active claim on my property. By evening, half the town had heard that I walked into the Royal Bank with a pencil-sized eraser and made debt afraid of me. That was when Grant stopped treating me like a nuisance. He started treating me like a threat. And threats get paperwork. The first attack came through reputation. Wanted posters appeared around town with my face on them, or at least a drawing of someone tired, suspicious, and poorly combed. Honestly, the artist captured my spirit. The poster read, "Ryan wanted for document tampering, fraud, and unlawful alteration of civic order. Reward 50 gold. People gathered around them. Some looked afraid. Some looked greedy. One old man asked if he could claim the reward for telling me about the poster. I stood there in the crowd, wearing a hood badly. Clara found me and hissed that I needed to hide. June said I needed better branding. I looked at the poster. The dangerous word was wanted. If I erased wanted, it became nonsense, but nonsense might still leave the charges. Then I saw the phrase for document tampering. I erased tampering. Ryan wanted for document, fraud, and unlawful alteration of civic order. That did not help. It made me wanted for document. Honestly, very accurate. I erased fraud. Ryan wanted for document, and unlawful alteration of civic order. Still bad. Then I erased unlawful. Ryan wanted for document, and alteration of civic order. The poster shivered. The crowd murmured. An official nearby frowned and said the poster seemed to be requesting me for document and civic alteration services. Since there was a reward, perhaps the city was hiring me. June immediately began collecting the posters. By noon, she had submitted 27 copies to the guard office as proof of municipal demand for my services. By afternoon, the town owed me 50 gold for public document consultation. They refused to pay, of course. So Clara found the posting authorization. Payment of reward upon verified notice completion. I erased reward. Payment upon verified notice completion. Now they owed me payment, not a reward. Payments had rules, rewards had excuses. The city paid 12 gold just to make me leave the office. Grant's wanted posters became my first government contract. It was beautiful. But Grant learned fast. His next move avoided public text. He invited every major merchant, guild leader, and noble agent to a banquet and spread a rumor that I was using forbidden magic to undermine legal order. I was not invited, which hurt less than the idea of wearing formal clothes. By the next day, customers stopped coming. The guild froze my quests pending investigation. The property office delayed my repair permits. The bank refused service. Nobody put it in writing. That was clever. You cannot erase a whisper. For 3 days my little office went silent. I sat in my mansion, eating stale bread, staring at my eraser, feeling the old office fear crawl back into my chest. The fear of being locked out by people who never had to explain themselves. Clara wanted to storm the guild. June wanted to start a counter-rumor that Grant collected cursed spoons. I wanted to sleep for a week. Then a delivery arrived. No sender. Inside was a folded invitation to the Royal Civic Academy's public examination. Anyone who scored high enough could earn a civic consultant credential. The credential forced town offices to accept their filings. At the bottom, in small letters, it said, "Applicants of common status are not eligible for final ranking above provisional 3rd tier." I smiled so widely Clara stepped back. Grant wanted to remove me from unofficial influence, so I would become officially annoying. The academy exam was held in a marble hall full of young nobles, rich merchants, and commoners who looked like they had already apologized for existing. I arrived in my repaired office coat, carrying a dull pencil and the smallest eraser in the kingdom. The examiner explained the rules. No magic, no cheating, no outside assistance. All answers must be written in ink. That last one hurt. I could not write new reality, but I could answer normal questions badly like anyone else. The test had sections on law, taxes, guild procedure, trade disputes, property codes, and emergency sanitation policy. Everyone else groaned. I nearly cried. It was all paperwork. For the first time in my life, my useless experience became a combat stat. I answered the questions honestly. I knew systems. I knew how clauses trapped people. I knew that a fee called administrative support was usually just punishment wearing a nicer hat. Still, some questions were impossible because they required local noble law, I guessed. When results were posted, my score was high but not perfect. Ryan 82 points, rank provisional 3rd tier, common status, not eligible for upper placement. A group of noble students laughed. Grant stood near the board, smiling like he had sponsored my humiliation. He had planned it. He knew the exam cap would keep me low no matter how well I scored. I stepped closer. Clara whispered, "Careful, everyone is watching." June whispered, "Charge admission next time." I looked at the posted result. Not eligible. The eraser touched the board. Ryan 82 points, rank provisional 3rd tier, common status, eligible for upper placement. The board did not explode. It corrected. Clerk came running from the scoring table, confused. He checked the master sheet. The master sheet now matched the board. Eligible. But my score was still 82. There were noble students with 90. Grant's smile began to return. Then I noticed something else on the ranking rules. Tiebreak preference, noble status, donation history, family service, academy recommendation. There was no tie, but there was a scoring adjustment section. Penalties, illegible writing, unapproved paper, failure to cite subsection, common status cap. My 82 included a common status cap penalty. I erased common status cap. A cap on status, not a penalty category. The clerk recalculated. My score became 96. The hall went quiet. Then the examiner announced that, by official scoring, I had placed first. The noble students looked at me like a mop had inherited a castle. Grant's smile died with paperwork still in its mouth. I received a silver credential that allowed me to represent clients in civic offices. Clara cried a little, then threatened to deny it if I mentioned it. June asked if the credential came with bulk filing privileges. I said yes. She looked at me like I had proposed marriage, but to profit. With the credential, everything changed. Before, I slipped through cracks. Now I walked through doors and made officials stamp things while they sweated. I opened an office in the mansion foyer, not officially, at first. The business license application had been denied because the property was residential only. The rejection said, "Business use not permitted." I erased "not." "Business use permitted." Then the fire safety inspection failed because the east wing had an unknown magical noise. I erased "unknown." Magical noise. The inspector wrote that magical noise was outside his department and approved the rest. June brought a sign from an old shop that once said, "White room laundry and stain removal." I erased "laundry and stain." "White room removal." Clara said that sounded like a kidnapping service. I erased "nothing." Branding was hard. People came anyway. Every morning a line formed outside the gate, tenants with unfair leases, apprentices with fake fees, street vendors with license traps. Widows with inheritance clauses written by relatives who had hugged them at funerals and robbed them on paper. I could not help everyone. The eraser wore down slowly, and that terrified me. Every deletion shaved a tiny bit from its edge. It was not infinite. So I started teaching people how to read. Not magic, not loopholes. Just reading before signing. The first class had 6 people. The second had 20. By the 4th class, the guild sent observers. By the 6th, the bank sent someone to glare. I stood in my cracked ballroom under a chandelier held up by hope and bad rope, explaining that the phrase "subject to review" meant someone planned to hurt you later. The people took notes like I was teaching swordsmanship. Maybe I was. A contract is just a blade with polite grammar. Grant understood that my real danger was not the eraser. It was that people were becoming less afraid of paper. So he escalated. He went after Clara. One morning, Clara arrived at my mansion shaking with anger. The guild had suspended her for unauthorized record access. They accused her of leaking internal rules to me, the suspension notice said. Clara removed from guild service pending investigation, salary withheld, lodging privileges revoked. She tried to look calm, but I had seen that expression in office workers who had just lost health insurance. The guild had used her kindness as a crime. I wanted to erase the whole notice until it became confetti. But rage makes sloppy hands. I breathed. Clara removed from guild service pending investigation. Removed was dangerous. If I erased it, the sentence became Clara from guild service. Nonsense. Salary withheld. Easy erase with. Salary held. Held by whom? The guild, presumably, but held could imply reserved. Not enough. Lodging privileges revoked. Erase ray. Lodging privileges voked. Useless. Then I looked at pending investigation. If the investigation ended, the suspension ended. The guild had not started one. They never intended to. I took Clara to the guild hall and requested the investigation file. The clerk said it did not exist yet. I pointed at the suspension notice. Pending investigation. I erased pending. Clara removed from guild service investigation. The sentence became awkward, but the official interpretation was immediate. The removal itself was under investigation. Now the guild had to investigate whether removing Clara was valid. And because Clara was a guild employee, internal rules required suspended employees under review to retain salary and lodging until the investigation concluded. The guildmaster shouted for an hour. At the end, Clara got her pay back, her room back, and temporary authority to audit the suspension process. That last part came from a rule saying, investigating officer may inspect all relevant records. The guild tried to assign someone else as investigating officer. I erased someone else as investigating officer. Nobody wanted to parse that, so Clara appointed herself. By the end of the week, she uncovered 3 years of hidden fines, fake equipment charges, and a special noble referral fee that had been draining common adventurers dry. The guildmaster tried to bury the report. Clara stamped it public. The public report caused riots. Not violent riots, worse. Administrative riots. Hundreds of adventurers lined up demanding refunds, receipts, and copies of subsection 7. The guild hall became a battlefield of forms. Warriors who had once laughed at me now marched in carrying folders. One axe fighter asked me how to phrase a reimbursement request without sounding too emotional. I almost ascended. Grant's allies inside the guild collapsed under refund claims. Guildmaster resigned after his employment contract was reviewed, and the phrase generous severance package became severance package. He left with a chair and a headache. Clara was promoted. Not to Guildmaster, that would have been too simple. Board appointed her acting administrative director, because the guild charter said an acting administrative director may assume operational control during leadership vacancy. It originally said may not assume. I had sneezed near it. Accidents happen. With Clara inside the guild, June in the market, and me in the mansion, we became a triangle of mild civic terror. The poor called us helpful. The rich called us destabilizing. The newspapers called us controversial. I asked the newspaper for a correction because controversial had too many syllables. They refused. Then came Alice. Alice arrived in a plain carriage with no crest, which immediately told me she was important. Only powerful people try that hard to look normal. She walked into my office while I was helping a potter reduce a kiln tax from 12 silver to 2 by erasing a 1. She waited until the potter left, then placed a royal seal on my desk. My first instinct was to hide the eraser in my mouth. I did not because I had standards and also choking risk. Alice was calm, elegant, and had the kind of posture that made chairs feel judged. She introduced herself as a royal auditor sent to review irregular civic alterations in Larkridge. Clara stiffened. June, who had been counting coins near the window, quietly moved the coins farther from the law. Alice looked at me. Are you Ryan's? Depends on the fee. She did not laugh. Royal auditors, I learned, are immune to normal humor because they have seen budgets. She asked how I had changed so many legal outcomes without new filings. I said careful reading. She asked why official records around me kept losing words. I said the kingdom had a bloated writing culture. She asked to see my hands. That was new. I showed them ink stains, paper cuts, a tiny white eraser hidden under my sleeve with the survival instinct of a mouse. Alice noticed the sleeve. Of course she did. She reached for it. I moved back. The room froze. Clara's hand went to a letter opener. June's hand went to a coin pouch, which for her was basically a weapon. Alice sighed. I am not here to arrest you. That sentence has never made anyone less arrestable. She placed a royal decree on the desk. Temporary authority granted to investigate document anomaly. Subject may be detained if active threat to crown stability. I read it carefully. Subject may be detained if active threat to crown stability. If I erase threat, it became subject may be detained if active to crown stability. Strange may be useless. If I erased detained, it weakened the order but might expose me. Instead, I erased active. Subject may be detained if threat to crown stability. Alice watched me do it. The air snapped. Her eyes widened, but she did not scream. The decree changed in front of her, and reality obediently folded around it. For the first time, someone saw the eraser work openly. Alice read the decree again. You removed a condition. I simplified a condition. Now I can detain you if you are any threat, not only an active one. I paused. That was true. Clara slowly turned toward me. June whispered that was not your best invoice. I had made the decree worse. Alice could have arrested me immediately. Instead, she smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly. Like someone who had just confirmed a theory. You are powerful, she said, but not invincible. That was the second most important lesson I learned. Subtraction is not always improvement. Alice stayed in Larkridge for the audit. She read our cases, interviewed our clients, inspected my mansion, and wrote notes that were probably worth more than my furniture. I expected her to condemn us. Instead, she became confused. Not because we were innocent. We were absolutely guilty of making bureaucracy cry. She became confused because every person we helped had been trapped by something technically legal and obviously rotten. A widow's inheritance stolen by a cousin through a funeral clause. A street vendor fined for selling fruit too close to a fruit district. An apprentice charged for training materials that were never provided. Family evicted because their lease defined home as the physical structure, and the landlord removed the door, claiming it was no longer a home. Alice read that 3 times. Then she asked what I had done. I showed her. The eviction notice said, tenant must vacate if home is no longer enclosed. I erased home. Tenant must vacate if is no longer enclosed. The clerk had ruled the condition incomplete and dismissed the eviction. Alice rubbed her forehead. That should not work. A lot of this kingdom should not work, I said. For the first time, she laughed. A little. Tiny. But I counted it as a civic victory. Unfortunately, Alice's audit gave Grant a new angle. If he could not beat me locally, he would accuse me nationally. He petitioned the capital for emergency review, claiming I was destabilizing class order, corrupting guild law, and using unauthorized reality-altering stationery. That last phrase hurt because it was accurate. A royal summons arrived. I was ordered to appear at the capital within 7 days. Failure to appear would result in arrest. June suggested erasing failure again. I refused. I had learned. Sometimes the trap is not the wording. Sometimes the trap is the stage. Grant wanted me in the capital, surrounded by nobles, judges, and laws I had never read. He wanted me away from my allies. He wanted me scared enough to make a mistake. So I did the opposite. I went loudly. Clara filed a public travel notice. June sold tickets for a farewell breakfast, which somehow became a fundraiser for legal defense in pastry. Alice, still officially auditing me, announced she would escort me to ensure procedural fairness. Grant did not expect that. Neither did I. The road to the capital was peaceful, which made me more nervous than bandits. Peaceful roads mean the ambush is probably legal. Halfway there at a toll bridge, officials stopped our carriage. They presented a transit tax. Unauthorized civic consultant movement surcharge, 25 gold. Clara cursed. June asked if the bridge accepted installment plans. Alice narrowed her eyes. This fee is not standard. The toll official shrugged. New order. I read the order. It said surcharge applies to suspicious individuals traveling for inquiry, trial, audit, or royal review. Suspicious individuals. Beautifully vague, probably drafted by someone who owned a mirror and hated it. I could erase suspicious, leaving individuals. That would apply to everyone and cause chaos. Tempting, but we needed to cross. I erased surcharge. Applies to suspicious individuals traveling for inquiry, trial, audit, or royal review. The toll official stared. What applies? I shrugged. He looked at Alice, who said that if the order did not specify a fee, obstruction of a royal audit escort would require a written explanation. The toll gate opened so fast it squealed. Behind us, every traveler began asking why the mysterious thing applied to them too. By sunset, the bridge office closed for interpretive review. That was our first sign. Grant had people everywhere. The second sign came at the Capitol gate. A guard captain checked my summons and frowned. Detention order, he said. Alice snapped that no detention order had been issued. He showed us a fresh one. Ryan to be held until hearing, visitors prohibited, counsel prohibited, outside documents prohibited. It was clean, brutal, designed to separate me from Clara, June, and Alice. I could not erase while surrounded by guards, not without starting something I could not finish. So I looked helpless. This is a useful skill when you have spent years being underestimated by people with nameplates. The guards took me inside the gatehouse. They searched my coat. They found coins, lint, 3 folded permits, and a pencil stub. They missed the eraser. Not because I hid it well. Because I had rubbed it against the search inventory form before they began. The form originally said, inspect pockets, sleeves, shoes, hidden tools, magical objects, and suspicious personal items. I erased hidden. Inspect pockets, sleeves, shoes, tools, magical objects, and suspicious personal items. The eraser was visible in my cuff, but because it was not a magical object by their standard test and did not look suspicious to people who respected swords more than stationery, they ignored it. They locked me in a holding room with a bench, a bucket, and a motivational poster that said obedience prevents suffering. I laughed so hard the guard told me to be quiet. The poster was official prison property. I erased obedience. Prevents suffering. The guard returned, read it, and looked spiritually troubled. While he processed that, I checked the detention order copy left on the table. Visitors prohibited, counsel prohibited, outside documents prohibited. 3 walls. I only needed 1 door. I erased prohibited after counsel. Counsel. Then I erased prohibited after visitors. Visitors. Outside documents still prohibited, which meant Clara could enter but not bring papers. That was fine. Clara was a paper weapon, even unarmed. 1 hour later, she marched into the holding room with Alice behind her, and June, pretending not to know the snack vendor she had bribed. The guards insisted the order allowed visitors and counsel. Because it did. We prepared in the cell. The hearing would be before a royal administrative panel, not a criminal court. That was important. Administrative panels did not need proof beyond procedural concern. They could suspend my credential, freeze my property, and confiscate suspicious items. The eraser was at risk. I could not let them take it. June asked if we could make a fake eraser. Clara asked if we could argue lack of jurisdiction. Alice said the panel cared more about preserving order than truth. I listened. Then I asked Alice for the panel charter. She hesitated, then handed over a copy. At the top it said, Royal Administrative Panel, empowered to review unauthorized civic alteration, credential abuse, and threats to noble stability. There was the real charge. Not public safety. Noble stability. I erased noble. Threats to stability. Now the panel had to consider whether the system itself was stable. Alice looked at the page for a long time. You just widened the review. I know. That could backfire. Everything could. That's why this world is interesting and terrible. The hearing hall was packed. Nobles filled the balconies. Clerks lined the walls. Grant sat near the front, dressed like a man attending his enemy's funeral and expecting good catering. I stood alone at the center table with Clara as counsel, June as financial witness, and Alice as royal auditor. The panel chair read the charges. Unauthorized alteration of official documents. Disruption of civic order. Interference with noble protections. Possession of unknown artifact. The room murmured at artifact. Grant smiled. Clara argued first. She spoke calmly, listing every case where my interventions prevented fraud, debt abuse, illegal seizure, or administrative contradiction. She did not say magic, she said correction. She did not say loophole, she said compliance clarification. I had never been prouder. Then Grant spoke. He accused me of weaponizing ambiguity. He said commoners could not be trusted with legal power. He said hierarchy existed to protect peace. He said people like me resented order because we were born below it. That one landed. Because part of it was true. I did resent order. Not because I was below it. Because I had read it. The panel chair asked me to present the artifact. I placed the eraser on the table. The hall leaned forward. It looked pathetic, small, white, worn at one corner, slightly dirty from years of my old office life and weeks of civic vandalism. Someone in the balcony laughed. Grant said this is the weapon that terrifies Larkridge. More laughter. I picked it up. Yes. The laughter thinned. I asked permission to demonstrate. The panel chair refused. The refusal was written into the hearing record by a clerk. Demonstration denied. I looked at the clerk's page. Then I looked at the panel chair. May I inspect the record for accuracy? Administrative hearings love accuracy. The chair allowed it. I stepped to the clerk's desk, saw the line, and erased denied. Demonstration. The clerk blinked, read the record, and announced, demonstration entered. The hall fell silent. The panel chair opened his mouth, but the record had already accepted the demonstration. Officially, it was happening. I turned to Grant. He was no longer smiling. I asked him to provide one noble law he believed was essential to stability. He produced a prepared scroll instantly, because men like Grant bring oppression in presentation format. The law said, civic privileges may be restricted from common-born citizens when such restriction preserves noble administration. I held it up so the hall could see. Then I erased noble. Civic privileges may be restricted from common-born citizens when such restriction preserves administration. Meaning shifted. Now the panel had to ask whether restricting commoners actually preserved administration at all. Then I erased restricted. Civic privileges may be from common-born citizens when such restriction preserves administration. The law collapsed into nonsense. Nothing exploded. No throne cracked. No dragon woke. The kingdom did not fall because one sentence stopped stepping on poor people. I faced the panel and said, if your stability depends on one ugly word, maybe the word is not the problem. That was probably the coolest sentence I had ever said. I ruined it immediately by coughing on eraser dust. Still, the damage was done. The hearing shifted from my guilt to the kingdom's paperwork. Alice presented her audit. June presented market figures showing that after my so-called disruptions, small business revenue rose. Clara presented guild refunds and increased quest completion. Even the guards from my neighborhood patrol submitted a statement saying property disturbances decreased after patrol rules expanded. Grant tried to interrupt. The panel chair warned him. Grant produced a final document. A confiscation order. Artifact to be seized immediately for crown safety. He had expected this moment. So had I. He held out his hand. Guards approached. I looked at the order. Artifact to be seized immediately for crown safety. If I erased seized, maybe it became artifact to be immediately, not enough. If I erased artifact, maybe the object category vanished, risky. Then I saw crown safety. I erased crown. Artifact to be seized immediately for safety. Now the order demanded seizure if it improved safety generally. Alice stepped forward and asked whether taking the artifact from its current handler in a crowded hall without containment protocol had been certified as safe. The guards stopped. No certification existed. The panel chair asked for safety procedure. There was none. Grant's confiscation order died under its own missing paperwork. A thing of beauty. The panel did not absolve me. That would have been too fair. Instead, they issued a compromise. I would be placed under royal supervision. My civic credential would be expanded but monitored. All future document corrections would require logging. And I would be appointed provisional consultant for administrative simplification. Grant looked like someone had swallowed his inheritance. Clara squeezed my arm. June whispered that provisional consultant sounded billable. Alice said nothing, but she looked relieved. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt the eraser in my hand. Smaller than before. Every win had a cost. The capital loved me for exactly 3 days. People came from every district with documents. Nobles came secretly, faces hidden, asking me to remove embarrassing clauses from old marriage settlements. Merchants came publicly, asking for tax reductions. Commoners came with folded papers held like wounds. The royal office gave me a room, a desk, and 3 clerks to observe me. The clerks lasted one morning. I lunched when it asked if I could remove his engagement penalty clause, when it cried over housing law, and when it joined Clara's reading class by mail. News spread. The eraser clerk had entered the capital. Grant retreated to his estate, but he was not finished. Men like Grant do not quit when beaten, they outsource. His next attack came through marriage law. Alice received a sealed contract from the royal family. It bound her to a political engagement with Grant. The document had been signed years ago by relatives treating her future like a budget allocation. She did not show emotion when she brought it to me. That made it worse. The contract said, Alice shall marry Grant to preserve noble unity and transfer regional influence upon royal approval. I stared at the words. I could not change Grant into someone else. I could not write freedom. I could not create a better life with ink. I could only remove. Alice watched me quietly. Clara read the contract and looked ready to stab a bookshelf. June asked what the penalty was. The penalty clause said refusal results in loss of audit authority, estate rights, and public standing. Nasty, complete, official. We worked through the night. If I erased Grant, the sentence became Alice shall marry to preserve noble unity. That might still force marriage, maybe to nobody, maybe to the nearest available political disaster. If I erased Mary, Alice shall grant to preserve noble unity. Nonsense, but marriage contracts sometimes survive missing verbs if intent is clear. If I erased shall Alice marry Grant, still bad. Then Clara noticed the approval phrase. Upon royal approval. The engagement required approval, had it been approved. Alice said not yet. The family assumed it was automatic. Automatic is a word cowards use when they do not want to ask permission. The approval form attached to the contract said, Royal approval not yet issued. I smiled. Alice saw it and took a small step back. Not yet issued. I erased yet. Royal approval not issued. Then I erased not. Royal approval issued. For one glorious second, everyone thought I had accidentally approved the marriage. June made a noise like a dying kettle. Clara whispered my name in the tone people use before a workplace incident report. But I turned the page. The marriage contract required approval upon review by the Royal Audit Office. Alice was the royal auditor assigned to the review. The approval was now issued, yes. But approval forms had an outcome section. Approved for filing only, marriage execution pending final consent. I erased marriage. Approved for filing only, execution pending final consent. The room went silent. Now the filing was approved, but execution of the contract itself required final consent. Alice's consent. When Grant tried to claim the engagement, Alice signed a statement refusing final consent. Because execution was pending it, the contract entered indefinite suspension. Grant could not force it without admitting the royal family had attempted to execute a contract without consent, a phrase even nobles found ugly. Alice kept her authority. Grant lost the alliance. And I learned that romance contracts were somehow more terrifying than debt agreements. Alice thanked me in the hallway later. Not dramatically, no tears, no sudden confession under moonlight. She simply said, "I owe you." I said, "Please don't put it in writing." She laughed again. A little longer this time. That was when I realized the capital was changing me. Back in Larkridge, I had used the eraser to survive. Then to protect my house. Then to help clients. Now I was touching laws that shaped the kingdom. The slope was steep. And at the bottom was either reform or prison. Maybe both. The next challenge arrived from the tax ministry. The kingdom's spring levy was coming. Every town paid based on population, trade, land value, and what the ministry called historical prosperity adjustment, which was a fancy way of taxing people because their grandparents once had a good year. Larkridge was assessed at triple its normal rate. Why? Because my activities had increased recorded market revenue. I had helped people earn more, so the ministry decided to take more. That felt familiar enough to be insulting. The assessment read, Larkridge owes 9,000 gold under emergency prosperity recapture. The mayor begged the capital for relief. Denied. Merchants panicked, small shops prepared to close, farmers threatened to leave, the guild feared collapse. Every good thing we had built was about to be turned into revenue for people who had never repaired a roof. Grant's signature was not on the assessment. It did not need to be. His friends had done it. I sat with Clara, June, and Alice in the royal records room, surrounded by tax books thick enough to stop arrows. The obvious move was erasing zeros, 9,000 to 900, but the ministry would recalculate. We needed to kill the mechanism. Emergency prosperity recapture. I hated every word. Emergency meant urgency. Prosperity meant punishment for improvement. Recapture meant the money was never really yours. I could erase emergency, leaving prosperity recapture. That still worked. Erase prosperity, leaving emergency recapture. Weird, but maybe enough. Erase recapture, leaving emergency prosperity. That sounded like a festival. June liked that option. Alice warned that tax law cross-referenced multiple statutes. Removing a word from one assessment would not stop the ministry from issuing another. So we went deeper. The levy statute defined emergency prosperity recapture as temporary increase applied when regional gains exceed noble forecast expectations. There, noble forecast expectations. A tax based on nobles being surprised that commoners did well. I erased noble. A temporary increase applied when regional gains exceed forecast expectations. Still bad. Then I erased expectations. A temporary increase applied when regional gains exceed forecast. Now the ministry had to produce a forecast, not vague expectations. Clara searched the archive. No forecast existed. Because they never expected proof to matter. But the tax machine had backup clauses. If no forecast is filed, historical prosperity adjustment may apply. I erased historical. If no forecast is filed, prosperity adjustment may apply. Still bad. June found the definition of prosperity adjustment. Prosperity adjustment means supplemental burden assigned to regions displaying growth beyond assigned station. Beyond assigned station. There it was again. Classism with a calculator. I erased assigned. Growth beyond station. Then station. Growth beyond. The definition collapsed. Alice moved quickly. She ordered a formal review before the ministry could replace the language. The panel ruled that without a valid definition, Larkridge's emergency prosperity recapture could not be assessed. The 9,000 gold levy vanished. But the story did not end there. June, being June, noticed that other towns had paid the same tax for years. Clara helped draft refund claims. Alice authorized review. I touched the definition once, and suddenly 15 towns could demand repayment. The tax ministry called it a crisis. The people called it spring. Grant called it treason. He finally stopped hiding behind polite channels. He formed a noble coalition and demanded an emergency decree to restore administrative purity. That phrase appeared on banners across the capital. Administrative purity. I wanted to erase both words from the concept of language. The coalition argued that my eraser created uncertainty. They said contracts were sacred, laws were sacred, titles were sacred. They did not mention that they had been using those sacred things to pick pockets with official seals. Their decree proposed 3 actions. First, suspend all civic corrections made under my credential. Second, confiscate the eraser. Third, arrest anyone assisting unauthorized alteration. That meant Clara, Joan, maybe Alice. Grant scheduled the vote in the Noble Assembly at dawn because villains love inconvenient meeting times. Alice warned us late at night. She could delay the vote but not stop it. Clara wanted to gather public testimony. June wanted to buy votes, then complained about noble pricing. I sat in silence, staring at the eraser. It was half its original size. Every time I used it, I felt its edge fade. If I burned it all stopping one decree, what came after? Then I remembered the office where I died. I remembered wishing I could erase 1-0. Not because I wanted power. Because I wanted a system to stop crushing people while calling it policy. I put the eraser in my pocket. At dawn, the Noble Assembly filled with silk, jewels, and expensive boredom. Grant stood at the center, reading the decree with the confidence of a man who had never been billed incorrectly. We were allowed to observe from the public gallery. Not speak. The decree copy was displayed below, behind a glass case enchanted against tampering. Grant had learned. No direct access. No paper within reach. No chance. Clara looked at me. June whispered, "Please tell me glass counts as paperwork." It did not. But the decree was not the only official text in the room. Every noble had a voting card. Each card read, "Vote in favor of emergency decree to preserve administrative purity." The cards were held by pages moving through the aisles. Pages were not protected by glass. I could not reach them from the gallery. But June could create a disturbance. She dropped a purse of coins. Not a subtle drop, a June drop. Coins scattered down the gallery steps like golden hail. Nobles flinched, pages looked up, guards looked down. Everyone's attention followed the money because civilization is mostly a coin trick. Clara shoved me toward the side stairs. Alice stepped into the guard's path and began asking whether gallery movement restrictions applied during a coin hazard. I slipped into the aisle below. One page hurried past with a stack of voting cards. I brushed the top card with the eraser. I did not erase favor. That would only affect one vote. I erased preserve. Vote in favor of emergency decree to administrative purity. Awkward but not enough. Then I erased purity. Vote in favor of emergency decree to administrative. The phrase broke. But the card was tied to the decree title. The system tried to reconcile it. The assembly clerk announced a procedural issue. The voting cards did not state a valid purpose. The vote could not proceed until corrected. Grant shouted that the decree text was clear. The clerk said voting instruments governed vote intent. Grant demanded replacement cards. That required a printing order. Printing order forms sat at the clerk's desk. I was already moving. Grant saw me. For the first time, he lost control in public. "Stop him." Guards turned. I grabbed the printing order. Replacement voting cards authorized for emergency decree. I erased replacement. Voting cards authorized for emergency decree. Now the existing cards were authorized, but invalid. The clerk spiraled. Could valid authorization apply to invalid cards? Could invalid cards be replaced without replacement authorization? Did the emergency decree authorize its own emergency printing? Was that circular? Was circularity allowed before breakfast? The assembly descended into procedural combat. Nobles shouted, clerks argued, the chair called recess. Grant looked ready to hit someone, but violence in the assembly required a decorum violation form. I knew because Clara had found one. By noon, the vote was delayed. By afternoon, public crowds outside learned the decree had stalled because nobles could not figure out their own cards. By evening, the phrase administrative purity became a joke in taverns. June sold commemorative blank cards. The decree died of ridicule before it died by law. Grant did not attend the next session. That should have worried me. It did. The richer and more humiliated a man becomes, the less he cares about procedure. 3 nights later, my mansion burned. Not completely, the old stone walls held, and the repaired roof only partly collapsed. But the foyer office, the client files, the reading class benches, the sign that said white room removal, All of it went up in orange light. I arrived from the capital too late to stop it. Clara stood in the garden with soot on her face, holding rescued ledgers. June had organized a bucket line and was yelling at people to stop throwing water on the stone fountain. Alice questioned guards by lantern light. No one had proofs. No signed order. No confession. No official text. Just flames. I walked through the blackened foyer after dawn. Ash crunched under my shoes. The desk was gone. The waiting chairs were gone. The cake-stained corner from the junior mage's thank you gift was gone. On the wall, someone had painted a message before lighting the fire. Know your place. It was not official. It was not reality-backed. The eraser could remove the paint, but not the threat. For the first time in a long time, I wanted a sword. Not to use. Just to hold while feeling dramatic. Clara found me staring at the wall. She said we rebuild. June said bigger with insurance. Alice said this was not random. I left. Not because anything was funny. Because the message was so stupid. Know your place. I had spent my whole first life being told my place. Cubicle, back row, overtime, quiet resignation, be grateful, be flexible, be reachable after hours. Then I came to a fantasy world, and the nobles used the same script with better handwriting. I picked up a burned board from the floor. Part of an old property notice had survived. Owner must restore damaged estate within 30 days or property reverts to municipal control. Grant's real plan appeared. Burn the mansion, trigger restoration law, seize the property when I failed. I almost admired the efficiency. Almost. The restoration notice had already been posted at the gate. Clara looked sick. June calculated repair cost and said a word I will not repeat because children may watch this recap. Alice said the law was valid. 30 days. I could erase 30 to 3, but that made it worse. Erase 30 entirely and the deadline might become vague. Vague deadlines let officials choose. I needed the opposite. I needed the property restored fast. With what money? Then I looked at the Municipal Disaster Relief Code. Yes, Larkridge had one. No, they never used it for poor districts. The code said, relief funds may be granted to noble estates damaged by riot, disaster, or unlawful assault, provided owner holds recognized protection status. I held recognized protection status because of the earlier not removal. The mansion was an estate. The fire was unlawful assault if proven. But proof was hard. The arson report said, cause unknown, no confirmed unlawful assault. I erased from unknown. Cause known, no confirmed unlawful assault. Risky known as what? The report updated when the inspector reread it. He had to identify the known cause. The burn pattern showed lamp oil. The gate latch had been forced. The wall message showed intent. He changed the cause to deliberate burning. Now only the second sentence blocked us. No confirmed unlawful assault. I erased no. Confirmed unlawful assault. The relief fund opened. Officials tried to deny the claim because the owner was a commoner. I sent them the same protection clause again, now framed. The city paid for restoration. But I did not rebuild the mansion as it was. I rebuilt it as an office, school, archive, and public hall. June negotiated materials. Clara organized volunteers. Alice quietly unlocked emergency supply rules that had apparently been waiting for someone with a conscience. People came from every district to help. Adventurers repaired walls. Bakers brought food. Street vendors carried bricks. The potter made tiles. The junior mage installed lights that only exploded when insulted. Grant burned my office. He accidentally built me a headquarters. 30 days later, the restoration inspector arrived and found the mansion brighter, stronger, and more crowded than before. The gate sign had changed. I did not write the new one. A sign painter made it, and I paid in actual money like a law-abiding citizen pretending not to smirk. It said, Public Civic Defense Hall. Under it in smaller letters. Bring documents, leave fear. I kept the burned board with Know Your Place in my office. I'd erased your no place. It became advice. Grant disappeared for 2 months. That was when the kingdom became noisy. Other towns copied our reading classes. Guild workers began auditing their own rules. Merchants started demanding plain language contracts. Commoners filed petitions with terrifying grammar. The capital called it civic unrest. I called it everyone finally reading the receipt. The royal family could not ignore it. They summoned Alice to present recommendations. She asked me to come. Meeting took place in a quiet council chamber, not the throne room. That made it more dangerous. Throne rooms are for speeches. Council chambers are where people decide how to ruin you politely. The queen attended behind a screen. Ministers sat around a polished table. The tax minister looked like he had personally been erased in a previous life. Alice presented 3 reforms. Plain contracts for essential services. Public access to fee schedules. Review of class-based exclusions. The room reacted like she had proposed feeding the treasury to geese. One minister said commoners would misuse legal access. Another said complexity protected tradition. A third said fees funded stability. I asked how much stability cost per line item. Alice kicked my ankle under the table. The queen behind the screen asked me directly whether I believed the kingdom's laws were unjust. Every eye turned. I wanted to be clever. I wanted to dodge. Instead, I said, I think any law that needs people to stay confused is already guilty. Silence. Then the tax minister asked whether I intended to erase laws I disliked. I said no. He looked relieved. Then I added, I prefer removing the parts that make them embarrassing. Alice kicked me again. The queen requested a demonstration. The ministers protested. The queen requested louder. They stopped. A sample law was brought, old, harmless, supposedly ceremonial. It said, citizens may petition the crown, provided the petition bears noble sponsorship or certified guild approval. I read it and looked at the room. Harmless, they said. Ceremonial, they said. The law that decided who could ask to be heard had a gate on it. I erased noble. Citizens may petition the crown, provided the petition bears sponsorship or certified guild approval. Still a gate. I erased or certified guild approval. Citizens may petition the crown, provided the petition bears sponsorship. Still bad. I erased provided. Citizens may petition the crown, the petition bears sponsorship. Awkward, not enough. I stopped. This was the trap of subtraction. Some rotten sentences are rotten all the way through. You cannot make them just by trimming. Sometimes you need new words. And I could not write reality. The minister smiled, sensing weakness. And Clara, who had come as my assistant, stepped forward with a stack of petitions from Larkridge. Every petition bore sponsorship. Not noble sponsorship, not guild approval. Sponsorship from other citizens. Hundreds of signatures. June had collected them, Alice had verified them. The law did not say what kind of sponsorship after my edits. The queen accepted the petitions. The ministers stopped smiling. That day I learned the eraser alone was not enough. Subtraction creates space. People have to step into it. The queen did not announce sweeping reform. Real power rarely moves dramatically when caution can wear a crown. But she created a temporary office for civic correction review. Alice was appointed director. Clara was appointed field coordinator. June received a supply contract so large she stared at it in silence, which was the closest she came to prayer. And I received a title. Acting Minister of Simplification. The appointment letter originally said, Ryan is not qualified for ministerial authority, but may advise. Alice handed it to me with one eyebrow raised. I erased not. Ryan is qualified for ministerial authority, but may advise. Then I erased may. Ryan is qualified for ministerial authority, but advise. That sounded broken, so Alice took the letter away before I made myself a decorative verb. The queen approved a cleaner version without magic. My office was official. Grant's nightmare had a desk. For a while things improved. Not peacefully, never peacefully. Every reform caused a new monster to crawl out of the forms. When we required visible price tags, merchants started using fractional fees. I erased fractional from the regulation, forcing whole number pricing. When landlords added cleaning charges, key charges, sunlight charges, and shadow charges, Clara drafted a fee disclosure sheet. I erased discretionary from discretionary fee approval, and half the charges evaporated. When guilds tried to rename penalties as gratitude contributions, June printed pamphlets explaining that gratitude demanded by invoice was just theft wearing perfume. When nobles complained that commoners were becoming rude, Alice asked them to submit examples. Most examples were just commoners asking questions. The kingdom did not collapse. It got louder. Loud is what happens when people stop whispering. The first crisis of the new office arrived before my nameplate was dry. I had been acting minister for exactly 2 days, which sounded impressive until I learned acting meant everyone could blame me while pretending I had no authority. My office had 1 desk, 3 shelves, 7 baskets of complaints, and a bell on the counter that people rang whenever they wanted me to lose the last piece of my soul. Clara created the baskets. June sold the bell. Alice said the bell was necessary for civic access. I said civic access should learn patience. The first basket was labeled urgent. The second basket was labeled very urgent. The third basket was labeled people are crying in the lobby. That was the one I opened. Inside were complaint forms from half the market district. Every merchant had received a new municipal seal inspection fee. Notice claimed stalls had to pay 5 gold per shelf, 2 gold per hook, 1 gold per nail, and a special adjustment charge for objects that might one day become shelves, hooks, or nails. It was beautiful in the way a disease can be beautiful under a microscope. The fee notice said, inspection fee applies to all commercial surfaces, attachments, supports, implied supports, and surface-adjacent opportunities. I stared at surface-adjacent opportunities. Baker had been charged 12 gold because the inspector said a table was emotionally near a shelf. A flower seller had been charged for a hook because one of her vines curved suspiciously. A fishmonger had been charged for implied support because gravity helped his barrels remain on the ground. This was not law. This was poetry written by a pickpocket. Clara found the source in 3 minutes because angry clerks are better than detective dogs. The inspection fee had been proposed by the Merchant Oversight Board, approved by a deputy minister, and printed on official blue paper. That meant the eraser could touch it. The obvious move was to erase all. Inspection fee applies to commercial surfaces. That would limit the charge but not kill it. I could erase fee, but then the sentence became inspection applies, and the city might still inspect every stall until the merchant starved in line. June leaned over my shoulder and said the phrase surface-adjacent opportunities should be punished. She was right. I erased adjacent. Inspection fee applies to all commercial surfaces, attachments, supports, implied supports, and surface opportunities. Still awful. I erased opportunities. Now it ended at surface. The notice said fees applied to all commercial surfaces. Every merchant groaned when I showed them. They thought I had made it worse. But I had learned something important about officials. They love broad words until those words point back at them. Next morning, I sent an invoice to the municipal office for their counters, desks, door plaques, ink pads, file cabinets, benches, mural podium, lunch trays, floor tiles, and the official forehead of the inspector, which I argued was a commercial surface because it displayed public arrogance. The office rejected my invoice. I requested the legal reason. They said the inspection fee applied only to market stalls. I placed their own notice on the desk. It did not say that anymore. By noon, they suspended collections. By evening, the Oversight Board issued a correction. The correction read, "This fee was issued in error and shall not be collected." That was almost good. Almost. I erased in error. This fee was issued and shall not be collected. The correction became stronger than the apology. The fee had been officially issued and officially uncollectible. Every merchant who had paid could demand refunds because the city had admitted the fee existed but could not be collected. The refund line wrapped around the block. The inspector tried to resign before facing the flower seller. Clara denied his resignation because his resignation form used the old version of the employment code. I did not even need the eraser for that. Sometimes ordinary bureaucracy bites its own ankle. That night, June brought honey cakes to the office and said my first week as minister had been profitable. I asked for whom. She said society. Then she charged society 3 copper per cake. The second crisis was less funny because it involved children. A group of apprentices from the lower district came to us with examination slips. Civic Academy had opened new clerk training seats after our reforms, and for the first time, commoners could apply without noble sponsorship. The announcement had made everyone hopeful. Hope is dangerous around forms. The exam results were posted in the Academy courtyard. Noble children passed, merchant children passed, guild children passed. Lower district children failed by 1 point, 2 points, or exactly enough to look accidental. I walked there with Clara and Alice, while June stayed behind to prevent the lobby from becoming a bakery-funded riot. The courtyard was packed, parents whispered, students stared at the board like it had personally killed their pet. Academy officials smiled with the calm expressions of people who believe a locked door is proof of morality. The board listed names and scores. Lower district apprentices had scores like 69, 68, and 69 again. Passing score 70. Plain, cruel, familiar. Back in my first life, companies rejected people with automatic filters, then said the process was fair because no human had cared enough to be evil. This felt the same, only with better robes. I asked to see the scoring rule. An official said results were final. Alice asked whether final results could be audited under the new Civic Correction Office. The official changed color. We received the scoring ledger after 4 hours, 3 signatures, and 1 tea break that tasted like resentment. The rule said, applicants from unverified districts receive a provisional conduct adjustment of -5 points until academy suitability is confirmed. There it was. Not intelligence. Not effort. Address. Clara looked like she wanted to staple the ledger to someone's face. Alice said the academy would argue unverified districts lacked educational records. I looked at the word unverified. If I erased the districts became verified. Simple. Too simple. The academy might demand proof and delay everything. If I erased negative, the adjustment became 5 points. That would add 5 points, but only for applicants from those districts. It would help now, but it would also leave the adjustment alive for future abuse. Another official could change the number later. Then I noticed until. Applicants from unverified districts receive a provisional conduct adjustment of -5 points until academy suitability is confirmed. Until meant the penalty existed before confirmation. I erased until. Applicants from unverified districts receive a provisional conduct adjustment of -5 points academy suitability is confirmed. The sentence limped. Too messy. I stopped and took a breath. I had almost damaged the text without a plan. That was how the eraser punished arrogance. It did not give second chances on paper. So I looked at the whole ledger instead of the one sentence. At the bottom of the page, a certification line said, final scores are valid only after all provisional adjustments are reviewed and confirmed by the Academy Board. The Academy Board had never reviewed them. The penalty had been applied automatically. I did not need to erase the penalty. I needed to erase the shield. I erased confirmed. Final scores are valid only after all provisional adjustments are reviewed and by the Academy Board. Broken, but the legal meaning collapsed in our favor. Scores could not become valid unless the adjustments were reviewed because the confirmation action was gone. The board had no completed step to claim. Alice asked for the board review minutes. There were none. The exam results were suspended. The academy panicked, parents cheered. Noble students complained that their success was being tarnished by procedure, which was a nice sentence because it tasted like karma. The academy tried to repost the same scores under emergency authority. Clara found the emergency authority clause. Emergency academic postings may bypass review when delay threatens institutional dignity. I stared at institutional dignity for a long time. It was the kind of phrase people use when they know public embarrassment is cheaper than justice. I erased dignity. Emergency academic postings may bypass review when delay threatens institutional. The clause became meaningless. The board had to review every adjustment in public. The first lower district apprentice gained 5 points. Then the second. Then the third. By sunset, 37 students passed. The academy official said this would lower standards. One of the apprentices, a tiny girl with ink on her cheek, asked whether standards were supposed to measure ability or neighborhood. Nobody answered. I did not give a speech. I just looked at the official and smiled the tired smile of a man who has survived performance reviews. That smile did more emotional damage than any sword. The third crisis tried to destroy us from inside. It began with praise. Courier arrived carrying a velvet folder from a committee of public order. The folder congratulated my office for reducing civic confusion. It praised our dedication. It called me a valuable irregular asset, which was the nicest insult I had ever received. Then it invited the Public Civic Defense Hall to accept official partnership status. June immediately distrusted it because the folder was velvet and no honest document needs texture. Clara read the agreement and became silent. Alice asked what was wrong. Clara placed the agreement on my desk. It said, Partner Office agrees to submit all document corrections, public advisories, educational materials, client records, and strategic actions for prior review by the committee. Prior review. There it was. Not censorship review. Not control partnership. In my first life, managers called it alignment before removing every useful part of a project. Fantasy officials had invented the same evil with quills. The agreement was clever because it offered money, a lot of money, enough to pay staff, expand classes, repair the roof again, and replace the chair June kept claiming was rustic instead of broken. If we refused, they would say we hated cooperation. If we accepted, they could delay every move until people gave up. I could erase prior. Partner office agrees to submit all document corrections for review by the committee. That still gave them review power. I could erase review. Submit all for prior by the committee. Nonsense may be invalid, but invalid might kill the funding too. June asked whether we needed the money. I said yes. She asked whether we needed the leash. I said no. Alice found the funding schedule attached in the back. Grant allocations are dispersed upon acceptance of partnership terms. I looked at acceptance. That word was the door. The agreement required acceptance of partnership terms, but the funding schedule only required acceptance, not compliance. If we accepted something less, maybe the money still triggered. On the front page, the title read, Partnership Terms and Oversight Agreement. I erased oversight. Partnership Terms and Agreement. Awkward but still a partnership agreement. Then I found the signature page. By signing, partner accepts all terms and oversight obligations. I erased and oversight obligations. By signing, partner accepts all terms. The remaining terms were mostly definitions, office addresses, and a line requiring us to maintain public service hours. Fine. We signed. The committee disbursed the first grant. 3 days later, they demanded our client records for prior review. Alice sent them the signed agreement. They sent a complaint saying we had tampered with the form. I asked whether they meant the official partnership agreement they had accepted and funded. They paused. Then they sent a second complaint with the phrase unauthorized alteration. I asked them to specify which current obligation prohibited it. They could not because I had removed that obligation before signing. The committee threatened to suspend our partnership. Clara pointed out suspension required a violation. They accused us of bad faith. June framed the accusation and hung it in the lobby under a sign reading customer feedback. The grant paid for 3 classrooms, a public copy room, and a tea station. The tea station became more popular than my legal advice, which hurt my pride but improved morale. The fourth crisis wore perfume. A wedding dispute came through the door during lunch. A young couple had signed a marriage contract with noble family consent language, which already sounded like a snake wearing lace. The bride's family wanted to cancel the marriage because the groom's new clerk's salary was not impressive enough. The groom's family wanted compensation because they had bought ceremonial shoes. The couple themselves just wanted to be left alone. I did not ask why everyone in fantasy worlds treated romance like a trade negotiation with candles. I knew why. Control loves ceremony. The contract said, marriage shall proceed only with continued approval from guardians, sponsors, and family representatives until ceremonial completion. The couple had signed it because the chapel clerk told them it was standard. Standard is the most suspicious word in any office. I could erase guardians, but sponsors and family representatives remained. I could erase continued, approval would still be needed. I could erase approval, but then the sentence might become marriage proceeds only with from people, which sounded like a drunk poem. Then I noticed the phrase ceremonial completion. Marriage was 2 weeks away. If ceremonial completion happened sooner, the approval period ended. I asked whether they had already exchanged vows privately. They had in front of 2 friends and a chapel candle. The chapel record said, private vow exchange is not ceremonial completion for purposes of family contract enforcement. I had to stop myself from laughing. It was too perfect. I erased not. Private vow exchange is ceremonial completion for purposes of family contract enforcement. The contract's approval period had ended the moment they exchanged vows. The families arrived furious. They brought 3 relatives each, 2 moral arguments each, and 1 cake no one wanted to waste. The chapel clerk checked the record, went pale, and declared the marriage completed for enforcement purposes. The families could still complain, but complaints had no effect except increasing local wind. The young couple cried. June asked what would happen to the ceremony deposit. The clerk said it was non-refundable. I asked to see that clause. Deposit is non-refundable if ceremony is cancelled by couple. The ceremony had not been cancelled by the couple. It had been rendered unnecessary by completion. June recovered the deposit and somehow kept the cake. By evening, half the city knew the civic hall could save marriages from relatives. By the next morning, every ant with a contract hated me. I accepted this as proof of progress. The fifth crisis was Grant's return. He did not walk into my office dramatically. That would have required courage and a tolerance for public laughter he no longer possessed. Instead, he returned through paper. A lawsuit arrived. Then another. Then another. By noon, our counter held a stack of claims tall enough to qualify as furniture. Grant had not accused me of one crime. He had accused me of 1,000 tiny procedural injuries. Unauthorized advising. Improper acceptance of petitions. Emotional depreciation of noble privilege. Interference with traditional discouragement. Damage to inherited confidence. I admired that last one, not legally, artistically. Strategy was obvious. None of the suits needed to win. They only needed to drain our time, money, and sanity. It was the noble version of sending calendar invites to meetings with no agenda. Alice said we would need to answer each claim. Clara had already started sorting them by jurisdiction. June asked whether lawsuits could be sold as paper by weight. I examined the first claim. Plaintiff alleges defendant caused reputational harm by implying noble procedures are exploitative. I could erase reputational. Harm remained. I could erase harm. Reputational remained, useless but not dead. Then I flipped to the certification page. All claims in this bundle are materially distinct and must be heard separately. There was the engine. I erased distinct. All claims in this bundle are materially and must be heard separately. Messy. I frowned. Too messy again. So I looked at the filing cover sheet. Bundle filing accepted as multiple separate actions under noble standing privilege. I erased separate. Bundle filing accepted as multiple actions under noble standing privilege. Still bad. I erased multiple. Bundle filing accepted as actions under noble standing privilege. Not enough. Then Clara pointed to a tiny line in the court fee schedule. Grouped filings may be consolidated at clerk discretion when claims share common facts. The lawsuits all shared common facts. Grant's ego had been injured by oxygen. But clerk discretion meant the court clerk could refuse. I erased discretion. Grouped filings may be consolidated at clerk when claims share common facts. That sounded wrong, but in legal grammar, it forced the action onto the clerk as a duty instead of a choice. The court clerk consolidated all claims into one hearing. Grant's 1,000 needles became one balloon. At the hearing, his advocate read the first allegation. I asked whether Grant's noble procedures were exploitative. The advocate said absolutely not. I asked how implying something false caused measurable harm. He said it damaged confidence. I asked if noble confidence was so fragile that one commoner with an eraser could depreciate it. The judge told me to be respectful. I asked where respectful was defined. Clara kicked my chair. The key claim depended on this sentence. Defendant's public statements created unlawful doubt regarding the rightful superiority of noble administration. Alice looked at me like she knew exactly which word I wanted. I erased rightful. Defendant's public statements created unlawful doubt regarding the superiority of noble administration. Now the court had to determine whether doubting noble superiority was unlawful. That question was poison. If the judge said yes, the common crowd outside would explode. If he said no, Grant's claim collapsed. The judge chose survival. He dismissed the consolidated case for insufficient injury. Grant's advocate requested permission to refile separately. The clerk showed him the consolidation order. June sold miniature paperweights shaped like lawsuit stacks. I bought one. It felt healthy to own a tiny version of my trauma. The sixth crisis came from people who claimed to be on our side. That was the worst kind. Some of our supporters began copying my methods badly. They could not erase reality-backed words, but they started scratching out sentences on contracts, smearing ink on tax bills, and shouting that subtraction would save them. Landlords and merchants used those sloppy edits to accuse our movement of fraud. For 2 days, the city filled with fake erasures. A tavern erased its own debt amount with soup and claimed divine revision. A student crossed out failed on an exam with charcoal and demanded a scholarship. A man rubbed a parking fine with bread until pigeons became involved. None of it worked. But it made us look dangerous in the stupid way, which is worse than looking dangerous in the competent way. The Royal Council demanded we control our followers. I hated that phrase. Followers are people when they agree with power. They become mobs when they agree with you. We needed rules. Not secret rules. Public ones. So I wrote with ordinary ink a civic hall notice. Do not alter your own documents. Bring them for review. Unauthorized scratching, smearing, tearing, burning, soaking, chewing, or soup-based correction will not be recognized. Alice said it was too long. Clara said it was perfect. June said we should add chewing because someone would try it. I had already added chewing. Notice became popular because people enjoy being warned about crimes they had not considered yet. But the noble papers mocked it. One headline said, "Eraser Minister admits public cannot be trusted." I took the newspaper to the office table. Headlines were recognized public text, not as law, but as reputation. The eraser sometimes affected rumors if the source had official circulation. That made newspapers dangerous and delicious. I erased cannot. Eraser Minister admits public be trusted. Bad grammar, but the paper's magic corrected the visible addition into a softer headline by the afternoon. Eraser Minister admits public trusted. It sounded like a compliment from a man having a stroke. The editor printed a correction the next day. The correction said, "Yesterday's headline contained a printing error. The public should remain cautious of unauthorized document alteration." That was fair. I did not touch it. Sometimes restraint is also subtraction. You remove your own hand from the problem. The seventh crisis was the one that changed my reputation from clever nuisance to national headache. Province in the north sent a sealed famine report. Grain had failed after storms. The local governor requested emergency food shipments. Ministry denied it because the province's storage ledgers showed sufficient reserves. On paper, they were not hungry. In reality, people were boiling grass. The governor's messenger said the reserves existed only in accounting transfers. Grain had been pledged, moved, pledged again, sold, taxed, and pledged a third time. Every ledger claimed the same sacks belonged to someone else, and because each claim was official, no one could release anything without triggering liability. It was a famine caused by footnotes. The room went quiet when we read the file. Jokes die fast around empty stomachs. Alice traced the ledgers, Clara mapped claims. June calculated how much grain could be bought if we liquidated emergency funds, private donations, and her personal reserve, which she called small and I called suspiciously shaped like a dragon hoard. The obstacle was a royal logistics order. No emergency release shall occur while ownership of reserve grain remains disputed. I could erase no. Emergency release shall occur while ownership remains disputed. That would force release, tempting. But if ownership remained disputed, creditors could seize shipments on the road. I could erase disputed. No emergency release shall occur while ownership remains. Terrible. I needed to erase the dispute, not the hunger. The ownership ledger listed claims. Crown Reserve Claim. Merchant Lion Claim. Tax Guarantee Claim. Transport Security Claim. Noble Compensation Claim. 5 claims on the same grain. Only one was morally real, but morality has poor filing habits. Noble Compensation Claim came from storm damage to a hunting lodge near the province. It had nothing to do with grain. The lodge owner had attached his claim because emergency funds were easier to reach than insurance. I erased compensation. Noble claim. Too broad, dangerous. I stopped before I made every noble claim part of the grain ledger. Then June pointed at the merchant lien. It was valid only if delivery had occurred. The delivery confirmation said, "Shipment received in full for accounting purposes." For accounting purposes. My entire previous life flashed before my eyes. Those words are where reality goes to die. I erased accounting. Shipment received in full for purposes. The confirmation broke. Without accounting as the purpose, the system could not pretend delivered grain was physically present. The merchant lien weakened. Then Clara found the tax guarantee. Reserve grain may be considered taxable asset, whether present, promised, or projected. Projected. I erased projected. Reserve grain may be considered taxable asset, whether present or promised. Still bad. I erased promised. Reserve grain may be considered taxable asset, whether present or broken enough that the tax claim could only attach to present grain. The grain was not present. The tax claim fell away. Alice moved fast. She issued an emergency review memo using her director authority. The Crown Reserve claim became primary. That meant the Crown could release grain without paying every parasite first. But the logistics order still said no release, while ownership remained disputed. Now only one fake dispute remained, the Noble Lodge claim. Its attachment form said, claimant asserts indirect relation to regional emergency by virtue of shared weather event. I had to sit down. Shared weather event. Storm hit grain fields and a rich man's gazebo, so he wanted famine relief. I erased shared. Claimant asserts indirect relation to regional emergency by virtue of weather event. Still ridiculous. I erased indirect. Claimant asserts relation to regional emergency by virtue of weather event. That almost strengthened it. I groaned. Clara took the paper away before I insulted clouds. And Alice found the appeal route. If a claim was frivolous, it could be suspended pending review. The problem was that frivolous required malicious intent. The lodge owner had written, claim filed in good faith reliance on broad emergency eligibility. I erased good. Claim filed in faith reliance on broad emergency eligibility. That did nothing legally, but it made the sentence sound like a cult. June laughed so hard she had to leave the room. I tried again on broad. Claim filed in faith reliance on emergency eligibility. Still weird. Then I saw eligibility. If I erased eligibility, the claim relied on emergency, not eligibility, not a rule, just emergency. It became too vague to attach to the fund. Alice suspended it for insufficient basis. The dispute cleared. Grain moved that night. First wagons rolled out under rain, guarded by adventurers who volunteered before anyone asked. June paid for tarps. Clara sent copies of the cleaned order to every checkpoint. Alice used the Queen's seal. I did not ride with them. I stayed in the office, because someone had to make sure no one reattached a gazebo to famine. 3 days later, the province confirmed delivery. People ate. The governor sent thanks. Northern papers called me the man who erased hunger. I hated that. I had not erased hunger. I erased the words that made powerful people comfortable ignoring it. There is a difference. But the name spread anyway. The names I had learned are also paperwork. The eighth crisis arrived as a festival. The Queen, under pressure from reform supporters, declared a civic clarity week. Every office had to post its fee schedules, complaint procedures, and appeal rights in public. I thought this was wonderful for about 4 seconds. Then June showed me the vendor permits. Festival stalls had been divided by class category. Noble-sponsored vendors received central square spots. Guild vendors received side streets. Independent commoners received alleys described as economically intimate. The permit map looked like someone had organized a society by contempt. At the bottom, the allocation rule read, prime civic locations reserved for historically recognized contributors, affiliated houses, and legacy sponsors. No one had written noble. They had learned. They hid class behind warm soup words. Historically recognized contributors. Affiliated houses. Legacy sponsors. The eraser could remove, but if I erased the wrong one, the other two remained. If I erased all three, the sentence might collapse and officials might cancel the festival. June wanted the central square because she had already bought 600 buns shaped like tiny legal seals. Clara wanted fairness. Alice wanted us to avoid a riot. I wanted lunch. We compromised by causing a riot of fairness. I found the original festival announcement. Civic Clarity Week shall promote equal public understanding of government services. Equal public understanding. Beautiful. Vendor permit map contradicted the stated purpose, but contradiction only matters if someone official admits it. So I filed a clarification request. Does equal public understanding apply to vendor placement, directional signage, and foot traffic access? The festival office answered quickly, probably because they thought no answer was dangerous. Their response said, equal understanding applies to informational displays, not commercial placement. I erased not. Equal understanding applies to informational displays, commercial placement. Awkward but enough. Then Clara filed an appeal saying commercial placement had to support equal understanding. The office tried to reject it. Alice reminded them the festival existed by royal decree. June printed maps showing how the alley vendors would receive less foot traffic, less public understanding, and more rats. The city hated the rat part. By morning, the square was redrawn by lottery. Nobles were furious. Common vendors were terrified. June was delighted because terror makes people hungry and buns sell well. Grant sent a messenger to buy an entire row of stalls through Shell sponsors. He wanted to flood the square with luxury vendors and make commoners look shabby. The Shell permit said, Sponsor may assign stall rights to designated representative. I erased designated. Sponsor may assign stall rights to representative. That sounded broader, not helpful. Then I erased representative. Sponsor may assign stall rights to. Invalid assignment. Every shell transfer failed. The stalls returned to lottery. Grant's luxury vendors arrived with no places to stand. One tried selling silver goblets from a fountain edge and was fined for reflective obstruction. I did not touch that fine. It was art. Civic Clarity Week became a disaster for anyone who liked quiet inequality. People learned how fees worked. They learned appeal deadlines. They learned which offices had been charging extra for forms that were supposed to be free. The most popular booth was not June's buns, though she came close. It was Clara's table, labeled "Bring one confusing sentence." People lined up with contracts. Clara translated them into plain speech on a chalkboard. A loan clause became "They can take your cart if you sneeze late." A work agreement became "You owe them money for the uniform you hate." A landlord notice became "The roof is your problem" because they used the word seasonal. Every translation got cheers. I watched from the steps and felt something twist in my chest. In my old life, I had believed confusion was just a personal failure. If I did not understand the policy, maybe I was tired. If I missed the deadline, maybe I was careless. If the contract hurt me, maybe I should have read harder. But now I saw the truth. Confusion was often manufactured. And people who manufacture confusion hate it when someone opens a window. That night after the festival closed, someone left a blank sheet on my desk. No seal. No signature. Just one sentence written in perfect black ink. You are not the first user. I stared at it until the room felt smaller. The eraser could not touch it. It was not official, not yet. But my hand shook anyway. Clara asked what was wrong. I folded the paper and said nothing. Not because I distrusted her. Because some fears grow stronger when spoken before they have shape. Ninth crisis started the next morning, when every office in the city received a questionnaire from the Empire. It did not accuse me. It did not mention erasers. It asked about administrative anomalies. That was worse. The questionnaire said, list all incidents involving text instability, unauthorized correction, record contradiction, civic role deviation, or unexplained reduction of payable amounts. I had to respect the phrasing. It was like reading my biography written by an enemy accountant. Alice confirmed the Empire sent such questionnaires before formal intervention. The kingdom was protected, but protection came with inspection rights. If the Empire believed local order had been compromised, it could send auditors with authority above the crown. Above the crown meant above Alice. Above Alice meant above the person who usually stopped me from becoming a legal firework. The city offices began filling out the forms. Some did it honestly. Some exaggerated to hurt us. Some minimized to avoid admitting they had been defeated by stationery. We could not erase every questionnaire. There were too many. So I looked for the common word. The question asked for incidents involving text instability, unauthorized correction, record contradiction, civic role deviation, or unexplained reduction. Unauthorized. Unexplained. Deviation. The Empire was not asking what happened. It was asking for categories that already made us sound guilty. I could not edit the Empire's master questionnaire. But every office had to attach a local certification. I certify this report is complete, accurate, and submitted without omission. That certification was dangerous because if a clerk omitted us, they could be punished. Fear would make them over-report. I needed to give them legal space to tell the truth without feeding the Empire's trap. Clara found an instruction page. Reports should exclude ordinary clerical corrections, approved civic reforms, and resolved fee disputes unless connected to ongoing instability. There, approved civic reforms. Resolved fee disputes. Most of our work fell under those. But unless connected to ongoing instability, left a hook. A hostile clerk could say everything was ongoing. I erased ongoing. Reports should exclude ordinary clerical corrections, approved civic reforms, and resolved fee disputes unless connected to instability. Still a hook. I erased instability. Reports should exclude ordinary clerical corrections, approved civic reforms, and resolved fee disputes unless connected to. The exception broke. Now the exclusion stood without a functioning exception. Alice sent the corrected instruction page as an official interpretation from our office. Every honest clerk used it. Every hostile clerk complained. Their complaints required examples. Examples required admitting the original scam. Several complaints died of self-preservation. One office sent a report anyway. The property archive listed me as an unauthorized commoner estate holder whose title had been altered by unknown means. Grant's fingerprints were invisible, but I could smell the perfume of his spite. The archive report included my original deed, the repaired deed, and a notation. Discrepancy suggests illegal removal of ownership restrictions. I could erase illegal. Discrepancy suggests removal of ownership restrictions. That sounded like reform. Tempting. But if the Empire saw removal, they would understand too much. Instead, I looked at discrepancy. The deed and the current record differed because the original had carried restrictions that the current law no longer enforced. If I could make the difference look normal, the report weakened. At the bottom, the archivist had checked a box. Potential anomaly. I erased potential. Anomalies. That made it worse. Clara stared at me. I stared at the paper. June said maybe I should not operate hungry. She was right. Then Alice noticed the box list. There were 3 options. Potential anomaly. Resolved historical discrepancy. No reportable issue. Only one box was checked. I could not move the check. I could not write a new one. But I could erase the checked options label. If I erased anomaly, the checked box read potential. Potential what? Nothing. The archive would need to clarify. Clarification would force them to compare with the current protection status that made my ownership legal. I erased anomaly. Potential. The report stalled. The archivist requested guidance. Alice responded that potential was not a category. The report was returned as incomplete. By then, most other offices had filed boring answers. The Empire would still notice us. But it would notice noise, not a clean confession. I thought that bought months. It bought 11 days. Because the final crisis before the Imperial letter was not a document. It was a person. Grant appeared at Civic Clarity Week's closing ceremony wearing plain clothes. Not noble robes. Plain clothes. That disturbed me more than a sword. He stood in the crowd while Clara handed out completion certificates to the first class of commoner document readers. June was counting festival profit with the serenity of a dragon after lunch. Alice was speaking to the Queen's aide near the stage. Grant looked at me and smiled. Not his old smile. No contempt. No theatrics. Just calm. That was when I knew he had found something bigger than his pride. A guard delivered a sealed municipal challenge to the stage. The ceremony stopped. The challenge read: Public Civic Defense Hall is accused of operating beyond charter scope by providing legal instruction, contract review, dispute intervention, public advocacy, and administrative pressure under the false description of education. The challenge was brilliant. It attacked our identity. Our charter allowed education. It did not explicitly allow legal service. We had survived by being useful in the gray space between. Grant wanted the city to define us narrowly and suffocate us. The crowd murmured. Parents clutched certificates. Students looked scared. If the hall was shut down publicly, the movement would not die, but it would bleed. The city officer asked for my response. I stepped onto the stage with the challenge in my hand. Every instinct told me to erase false. Under the description of education. That would help, but not enough. They could still say we exceeded scope. I looked at charter scope. Our charter, the one created after the fire, said, the hall may provide public education concerning civic documents, rights, fees, claims, petitions, and common administrative hazards. There was no service language, no representation, no intervention. But there was concerning. That word was enormous. Education concerning petitions could include how to file them. Education concerning claims could include how to challenge them. Education concerning hazards could include how not to be eaten alive by a contract with teeth. Grant's challenge tried to separate education from action. I needed to make the separation look absurd. I read his accusation again. Providing legal instruction, contract review, dispute intervention, public advocacy, and administrative pressure under the false description of education. I erased false. Providing legal instruction, contract review, dispute intervention, public advocacy, and administrative pressure under the description of education. The crowd went silent. The city officer blinked. The challenge now admitted all those things fell under the description of education. Grant's face changed by one tiny muscle. I was not finished. The officer said the challenge still alleged we operated beyond charter scope. I asked him to read the charter aloud. He did. The hall may provide public education concerning civic documents, rights, fees, claims, petitions, and common administrative hazards. I asked whether illegal fees were civic documents. He said sometimes. I asked whether fake debts were claims. He said yes. I asked whether a predatory marriage contract was a common administrative hazard. He said he would prefer not to answer. The crowd laughed. Laughter is not law, but it changes the temperature of law. Then Alice stepped forward and submitted a royal memorandum defining public education as including practical instruction. The memo had been drafted for later. She had carried it just in case, because Alice trusted me and also expected disasters the way sailors expect rain. The officer accepted the memo. Grant's challenge collapsed in front of everyone. People cheered. Clara looked relieved. June looked proud and annoyed that she had not charged admission. Grant only smiled again. Then he mouthed one word at me from the crowd. Empire. And walked away. That night I finally showed Clara, June, and Alice the blank note. You are not the first user. No one joked. June checked the doors. Clara checked the archives. Alice checked imperial law. I checked the eraser. It had become smaller again. Every victory had taken a bite. Every clever move had shaved away my only weapon. I had been spending my miracle like a salary and pretending payday would come. It would not. I thought about the words on the note. Not the first user. That meant someone before me had held something like this. Maybe an eraser, maybe a pen, maybe scissors, maybe an official stamp that could approve souls for lunch break. It meant the Empire had seen this kind of anomaly before. It meant their laws might already be designed to handle people like me. Next morning, I searched old archives for unexplained legal blank spaces. Clara helped. Alice quietly opened restricted shelves. June brought food and pretended not to be worried by insulting the dust. We found fragments. A century-old tax revolt that ended when every debt record in one town lost the word owed. A marriage reform movement started by a woman whose name had been scratched out of every surviving document. A collapsed noble house whose inheritance law contained blank spaces where gender restrictions used to be. Border treaty with an entire paragraph missing, followed by 50 years of peace no historian could explain. The official histories called them copying errors. They were not errors. They were scars. And every scar ended the same way. Imperial Review. After that, the user vanished from the records. Not died. Not executed. Vanished. I sat in the archive basement with dust in my lungs and a tiny eraser in my palm. In my first life, I had thought paperwork was harmless because it was boring. Now I understood boring was camouflage. A sword announces itself. The law waits quietly until your children inherit the wound. That was when the imperial letter arrived. Not royal. Imperial. The kingdom was peaceful because it was small and technically under the protection of a much larger empire to the east. People talked about the empire the same way office workers talked about headquarters, quietly. Carefully, only when something was already ruined. The letter arrived in a black tube, sealed with silver wax. Alice opened it in my office, and the room immediately felt colder. The decree read, all unauthorized reality-altering stationery shall be confiscated. Users shall be erased from civic record pending imperial examination. For a few seconds, nobody moved. I had seen threats before. Fake debts, rigged permits, noble title tricks, burn orders disguised as repair notices. But this was cleaner than all of them. The Empire was not saying I would be arrested. It was saying I would stop existing on paper. No property, no citizenship, no office, no legal name attached to any door, wage, license, protection, or appeal. June read the sentence twice, then said people with no records were very easy to lose. Clara stared at the paper like it had just slapped her. Alice looked furious in the quiet, royal auditor way, which meant her face barely changed, and every candle in the room seemed nervous. The imperial examination team would arrive in 10 days. 10 days. The old me would have panicked, hidden under a desk, and hoped a manager forgot my existence. The new me had learned an important truth. Managers never forget your existence when there is a form available to punish you. So I did not hide. I made tea. That scared everyone more. Clara asked if I had a plan. I said no. And I said that was fine, because plans were what stupid people wrote before seeing the actual policy manual. We spent the first night reading every imperial treaty in the archive basement. Not the summaries. Summaries were where hope went to die. We read the footnotes, addendums, amendments, emergency definitions, and one terrifying booklet called Ceremonial Exception Handling, which sounded like a cookbook for cowards. By sunrise, Alice found the first crack. Imperial authority could intervene in a protected kingdom when local records were uncontested. That word mattered. Uncontested. A clean record let the empire act cleanly. Contested record required review, hearing, witness registry, duplicate certification, and 3 different departments blaming each other in writing. In other words, the empire could erase me fast only if nobody made paperwork messy. I almost cried. Not from fear, from professional recognition. Finally, someone had designed a system terrible enough to be used for good. By noon, the mansion became a factory. Clara organized the clerks. June bribed every courier in Larkridge with bread, tea, and the threat of future discounts being revoked. Alice drafted objections so sharp they could cut glass. And I sat at the center of the ballroom, reading until my eyes burned, making tiny eraser marks only when a single word could turn a complaint from a cry for help into a legal trap. We did not forge documents. We did something much worse. We taught everyone how to file correctly. Bakers filed a contest against the phrase civic record because bread licenses were civic records. The street vendors filed a contest against the word user because every person used stationery when signing tax forms. The old adventurers filed a contest against the confiscation clause because the guild had once declared chalk an official marking tool during monster tracking season. The academy students filed a contest asking whether exam answer sheets counted as imperial recognized paper if the empire recognized the academy rankings. One child filed a complaint because his homework had the word eraser on it and he did not want the empire touching his bag. That one was not useful. I approved it anyway. Morale matters. For 10 days, Larkridge drowned the empire in polite, properly numbered irritation. The post office ran out of string. The courthouse ran out of stamping ink. The city ran out of people who thought I was just a weird man with a mansion. Every morning, Grant's supporters shouted that I was a fraud. Every evening, their own tax clerks accidentally asked our office for help because their protest forms had been rejected for using the wrong margin width. I helped them too. Petty revenge is fun. Competent revenge is better. On the 10th day, the imperial convoy arrived. No armies. Just 6 black carriages, 12 silent guards, and 1 inspector in a silver coat who walked like a man who had never waited in line. Grant rode beside him, smiling so widely I could almost see the unpaid debts behind his teeth. The city square filled before breakfast. Nobody had ordered people to come. That was why it mattered. The bakers stood with flour still on their sleeves. The vendors stood beside their carts. The adventurers stood in mismatched armor. The students brought notebooks. Few nobles came too, wearing the expression of people who had realized history might happen nearby and wanted a better seat. The inspector unfolded the imperial decree on a black table in the center of the square. Then he placed a pen beside it. Not a normal pen. A long black stylus with a silver nib. My eraser sitting in my pocket went cold. That was not a metaphor. The tiny thing actually chilled like it had just noticed a predator. So the empire had stationery too. Of course it did. I had spent months breaking unfair rules with a cheap office eraser, and the empire had probably been manufacturing premium cruelty tools with embossed cases. The inspector announced that I was subject to immediate record suspension pending examination. Grant stepped forward with a second document. A noble restitution claim. He accused me of obtaining property, office, influence, and civic standing through altered documents. Technically rude. Also technically fair. The crowd murmured. Clara's hand tightened around her folder. June looked ready to sell rotten fruit at a strategic discount. Alice stepped forward first. She said the decree could not proceed because local records were contested. The inspector did not even look at her. He said common objections did not qualify unless submitted by parties with standing. That was the trap. Standing. The empire recognized nobles, offices, guilds, and licensed bodies. People did not count unless a document said they counted. The inspector smiled. Grant smiled harder. The square went quiet. And that was when I started laughing. Not loudly. Just enough for the front row to hear. The inspector finally looked at me. I apologized and said I had heard that joke before. Then Clara handed me the kingdom's civic instruction manual. It was old, boring, and officially distributed in every courthouse. On page 42, under Petitions and Appeals, one-line read. Commoner residents are not eligible for imperial standing except through noble sponsor or guild authority. The inspector's smile returned. He asked if I was trying to prove his point. I said yes. Then I erased one word. Not to. The page now read. Commoner residents are eligible for imperial standing except through noble sponsor or guild authority. For one horrible second, the sentence sounded strange. Then the world blinked. Every petition ribbon in Clara's crates flashed once. The court clerks behind the inspector looked down at their ledgers and went pale. The crowd did not understand immediately. Clerks did. Clerks always understood when work multiplied. Alice announced that every resident objection now had standing. The inspector's face tightened. He lifted the black stylus. The silver nib touched the decree and the air bent. I felt the same pressure I felt when my eraser changed reality, except heavier, colder, and far more expensive. The inspector said imperial instruments overruled local corrections. The decree shimmered. Several petitions in Clara's crate began turning gray. So that was his power. Not erasing. Overriding authority. Very fancy. Very headquarters. Also very stupid. Because he had placed his instrument on the table beside his own decree. I stepped forward and asked one question. Was that stylus authorized? The inspector frowned. Of course it was. He said it was an official imperial correction instrument. I asked him to say that again for the court record. He did. Alice smiled. June whispered that I was about to do something annoying. She knows me too well. I took out the eraser. It was smaller than my thumb, worn down to a sad white crescent, but the whole square leaned away from it. The inspector ordered his guards to seize it. I touched the first sentence of the decree before they could move. All unauthorized reality-altering stationery shall be confiscated. I erased 2 letters. The sentence became, all authorized reality-altering stationery shall be confiscated. The black stylus screamed. I do not mean that dramatically. Made a tiny metal shriek, jumped off the table, and vanished into a locked evidence chest that had not existed 1 second earlier. The inspector stared at his empty hand. The guards stared at the chest. Grant stared at me with the face of a man watching his expensive lawyer fall into a well. My eraser remained in my fingers. Unauthorized. Cheap. Barely respectable. For the first time in either world, being underqualified had saved my life. The crowd exploded. The inspector tried to shout over them, but without the stylus, his voice was just a voice. Power hates becoming normal. Grant panicked and shoved his restitution claim onto the table. He demanded the inspector enforce it manually. The document reads, Ryan shall forfeit all property obtained through altered documents to rightful noble claimant. The square quieted again. That one was dangerous. It named maze. It named property. It named altered documents. And yes, a lot of my life had passed through documents that were now missing a suspicious number of words. Grant looked relieved. The inspector looked desperate. I looked tired. Then I asked Grant whether his noble inheritance had been recorded by documents. He said obviously. I asked whether inheritance edits, corrections, revisions, stamp renewals, title transfers, dowry amendments, tax adjustments, and boundary clarifications counted as altered documents. He stopped smiling. Nobles loved altered documents when the alterations were old, expensive, and performed by people wearing gloves. I placed the eraser on the word Ryan. Grant flinched, but I did not erase my name. Too obvious. Too defensive. Instead, I erased rightful. The claim now read, Ryan shall forfeit all property obtained through altered documents to noble claimant. Every noble in the square made the same sound. It was the soft gasp of hereditary panic. Because noble claimant was not specific. Any noble claimant. And if property obtained through altered documents could be seized, then every inheritance in the square had just become a buffet. Grant's allies stepped away from him, so fast they nearly formed a breeze. One old noble demanded his family records be excluded. Another said this proceeding was reckless. Third whispered that Grant had always been unstable, which was noble language for please do not audit me. Grant tried to grab the document. Clara got there first and pinned it under a stamp so heavy it sounded like judgment. The inspector saw his support evaporating. So he reached for the final threat. The second sentence of the decree. User shall be erased from civic record pending imperial examination. He said the stylus was unnecessary. The decree still stood. He would suspend my identity and sort the objections afterward. There it was. The final ugly little sentence. The one designed to make a person disappear before anyone could object. I looked at it for a long time. My whole life had been one long fear of sentences like that. Termination effective immediately. Request denied. Application incomplete. Payment overdue. Not eligible. No standing. Every office in every world had its own spellbook, and most of the spells were just ways to make a person too tired to argue. But I was not alone at the counter anymore. Behind me, Clara held crates of petitions. June held signed merchant ledgers. Alice held treaty clauses with enough bookmarks to qualify as a weapon. And behind them stood a city full of people who had learned the most dangerous skill in any kingdom. Reading before signing. I raised the eraser. The inspector ordered me to stop. I said he should have filed that request earlier. Then I erased one word. Erased. The decree now read. User shall be from civic record pending imperial examination. The sentence collapsed. Not with thunder. With a clerk's worst nightmare. Ambiguities. The decree fluttered, tried to enforce itself, failed to find an action, and stamped its own margin with the smallest red mark I had ever seen. Void. The word appeared by itself. The crowd did not understand at first. Then the courthouse bell rang once. A ledger clerk shouted that the suspension order had failed. Someone else shouted that the confiscation clause had seized the imperial instrument. Someone else shouted that Grant's claim had triggered noble exposure review. That last one was not my fault. Mostly. Grant backed away. The inspector looked at the decree, the evidence chest, the crates of petitions, the civic manual, and me. For the first time, he looked less like an empire and more like a man with a terrible afternoon. He said the matter would be appealed. Alice said it already had been. She held up one final document. Royal Emergency Charter, signed that morning by the palace and witnessed by the guild, merchants, courthouse, academy, and every public office in Larkridge that still had ink. It created a temporary civic correction office under my supervision to review predatory wording, contradictory fees, and unlawful record erasure. Temporary. Everyone looked at me. I looked at the eraser. There was almost nothing left. A normal person would have saved it. A smart person would have hidden it. A villain would have kept it forever. I had been all three on different mornings before breakfast. But a tired office worker knows when a tool has become the job. And I did not want to spend the rest of my life guarding a crumb of rubber like a dragon with anxiety. I placed the charter on the table. I found the word temporary. Then I rubbed it away. The charter read, Civic Correction Office under Ryan's supervision shall review predatory wording, contradictory fees, and unlawful record erasure. The last piece of the eraser vanished between my fingers. No flash. No heavenly voice. No congratulation window. Just white dust on my thumb. The charter glowed once and settled into the world. The mansion became official. The office became permanent. The people became parties with standing. And I became, against all reasonable hiring standards, the first minister of civic correction. The inspector could not arrest me without violating the charter. He could not erase me without a working decree. He could not use the stylus because his own confiscation clause had swallowed it. He could not rely on Grant because Grant was now being questioned by every noble who suddenly remembered a suspicious basement full of title amendments. So the empire did the thing all large institutions do when they lose publicly. It declared the outcome procedural. The inspector said the empire respected local process. Nobody believed him. Everyone applauded anyway. That is also local process. By sunset, Grant was not dragged away in chains. That would have been too satisfying, and reality hates clean endings. Instead, he was placed under record review, which was slower, crueler, and involved Clara assigning him a waiting number. He stared at the little slip like it was a death sentence. It was number 412. I almost felt bad. Then I remembered the arson. The feeling passed. The Imperial convoy left the next morning with one fewer stylus, 3 crates of contested forms, and a city full of witnesses waving politely. The Empire would not forget this. Of course it would not. A giant machine never forgives the pebble that jams one gear. But it had not erased me. It had not taken the mansion. It had not broken Larkridge. And more importantly, it had shown everyone that even Imperial ink could bleed. A month later, the mansion no longer looked like a cursed noble house. It looked worse. It looked like a public office. There were signs on every door. Clear signs. Short signs. Signs with no hidden exceptions, no decorative Latin-looking nonsense, and no fee tables that required a priest to interpret. Clara ran the front desk like a battlefield commander with excellent handwriting. June opened a legal supply shop beside the gate and made a fortune selling plain paper, honest ink, and mugs that said check the fine print. Alice split her time between the palace and our office, pretending she was only there for audits while reorganizing the kingdom one clause at a time. Grant visited every week for mandatory record review lessons. He complained constantly. He also started reading before signing. I hated that I was proud of him. As for me, I still woke up some mornings expecting fluorescent lights, an angry supervisor, and a spreadsheet named Final Version 23. Instead, I woke up in my ridiculous mansion, walked downstairs, and found a line of people holding documents they were no longer afraid to question. I did not have the eraser anymore. That should have made me powerless. But the strangest thing had happened. Once people saw a single word removed, they started noticing all the words that should never have been there. Not eligible. Non-refundable, irrevocable, unappealable, by noble discretion, at sole expense of applicant. The eraser was gone. The habit remained. One evening I stood on the balcony while the city lights came on one by one. Clara brought me a stack of new complaints. June brought me dinner and called it a consulting fee. Alice brought me a sealed report from the capital and told me not to open it until morning, which of course meant I opened it immediately. Inside was a single sentence from the Royal Archive. Several imperial instruments remain unaccounted for. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and put it in my drawer. The old me would have panicked. New me looked at the line outside my office, the people reading their own papers, and the blank space on my desk where the eraser used to sit. I smiled, because I had finally learned the difference between a cheat item and a revolution. A cheat item wins for one person. A revolution teaches everyone where to rub. And tomorrow morning, unfortunately for every corrupt official in the kingdom, our office opened at 9.